Martina Moran, an imperial princess with a fearsome reputation, was considered the most cruel villain, but a painful weakness lurked within her cold heart. Despite her dark fame and the weight of universal condemnation, she stubbornly held her head high and never bowed before people. Only the sacred beast of the empire was the creature for which her stern heart began to clench anxiously. But most of all, her soul was bound by her love for her daughter, quiet and fierce at the same time, like a fire hidden under ashes. The loss of the treasure tore her world apart, and the once cold princess changed so abruptly, as if fate had split her former life apart. The despair was so deep that she was ready to end her life with her own hands, just to start all over again one day. She sought to relive her fate in order to protect her daughter. But the harsh gods imposed harsh and merciless conditions on her. As a sacred beast of the empire, the girl required rare energy of growth, the power born from the kiss of loyalty of the pillars of the state. The pillars of the state were considered the greatest talents of the empire, irreplaceable people on whose shoulders its prosperity rested. The kiss of fidelity demanded sincere devotion. The lips touched a part of the body of the head of the family, securing an ancient and mysterious right. Martina knew that memories from her past life could lead her to yet undiscovered pillars of the state. But she realized with bitterness that almost every one of them was a dangerous madman, including the reckless doctor from the underground gangs. Among them lurked an unsociable scholar whose manuscripts held power that could one day spark a devastating war. Next to him stood a legendary mage, cunning, suspicious, and immensely ambitious, like a shadow biding its time. There was a cold general with the blood of a beast in his veins, and a calculating secretary who invisibly controlled all the information surrounding the princess. Martina decided to tame each of them in order to one day force her daughter's killer to answer for his terrible past. Deep down, she also longed to see her brother fall on his knees before her in this life. The secret of the empire that ruled the continent for centuries was hidden in the ancient protection of the state by powerful sacred beasts. The sacred beast was raised by the heir to the empire, and over time, a strong bond between parent and child was formed between them. When the sacred beast took on human form, its feelings became even stronger and deeper. He became attached to his parent with all his heart, and even in a crowd, he could unmistakably recognize him by his familiar scent. The young lady knew that her mother was an imperial princess who was always busy with things, but she so wanted to play with her every day. People around her whispered that her mother was a cruel woman, a witch, and a monster. But for a girl, such titles sounded almost proud. A moment later, the girl ran to her mother with a beaming smile, not hiding her joy. In her heart, there lived a firm conviction that her mother was the greatest and strongest woman in the whole world. For a while, the young lady looked at her mother with quiet admiration, enjoying every moment with her. But soon she could not bear it any longer and rushed forward, hugging her tightly with childish sincerity. The young lady looked at her mother with a playful smile, anticipating their usual daily fun, and Martina agreed with a gentle smile. After a light countdown, they simultaneously made funny faces, filling the yard with childish joy. They met eyes with a smile, not noticing that the other guests were watching them closely. The girl glanced at those present and thought with curiosity about who could be her father. Martina smiled softly, understanding the kind of people her daughter was talking about, and patience grew in her heart. Martina declared that these people were as dangerous as monsters and could not be trusted for a moment. Martina was firmly convinced that none of them were capable of becoming a worthy father for her daughter. She turned around proudly and showed her daughter that her love and care were all that was needed for her. She was ready to protect the child at the cost of her own life, because in her past life she had lost her beloved child. One dark day in her past life, she found her daughter in a very bad state, her heart aching with pain. Mayfield pointed at his sister with a sly grin, declaring that she had killed a sacred beast and such a crime was sacrilege. Rage overwhelmed Martina. She screamed that her child was alive and she would carefully cure her daughter. But suddenly her gaze stopped on her daughter, and she froze in a daze, feeling the child's pain. The girl trembled and whispered to her mother about how much pain she was in. Marina's heart sank with horror. The prince mockingly declared that the court wizard had already examined his daughter, and the sacred beast would not live a day. He came closer to his sister, with a sly grin demanding an admission of guilt and submission, as if playing with someone else's fate. Soon he shouted that by order of the emperor, the princess was being deprived of her noble title, and a threat hung next to every word. The knights were called upon to carry out the punishment, 100 lashes and exile to the border, leaving no hope of salvation. In her past life, the young princess was a complete failure, forced to endure cruelty for actions she did not commit. The princess was called a villain who destroyed the empire, and was even called a god-killer when she was sent to a deserted and uninhabited border. At this time, her brother inherited the throne, seizing power over the state. In their struggle for the empire's legacy, they had to raise a dedicated beast to gain power and the right to inherit. Her brother, who had always opposed her, finally won, consolidating his power and strength. But she was not going to give up. Her inner fire did not allow her to accept defeat. The fallen princess decided to find a way to resurrect the child and regain her rightful inheritance. Gathering her last strength, she escaped from exile, but was hunted by assassins sent by her brother. The princess was always in hiding, eluding her pursuers like a shadow in the middle of the night. Finally, Martina found the legendary prophet, the only one in 1,000 years who could help her change her destiny. Martina presented him with a small box, begging him to resurrect her child and restore hope. The prophet acknowledged her courage and determination, but asked if she was willing to pay the highest price. He wanted to know if she was willing to sacrifice her own life to start over and have a future. Without hesitation, the princess agreed. And then the prophet said that in this life, he would be able to help her. Martina beamed with happiness, thanked the prophet, and put a dagger to her chest, ready to do anything for the sake of a new future. After some time, the young princess opened her eyes and was surprised to notice that the wounds had disappeared. Her body had not changed, and her hair remained long and undamaged. She looked into the distance with a fierce grin and felt that she had truly been reborn, as if fate itself had given her a new chance. Unable to contain her malicious laughter, she felt that her enemies must be quaking with fear, because she had returned stronger than before. Soon her gaze fell on the pendant created to celebrate the contract with the sacred beast, and her heart began to beat faster. Then she realized that her child was nearby, and a feeling of immeasurable relief spread through her chest. The princess quickly hugged the egg, inhaling carefully, for the child's life had been saved, and the fear for his fate subsided slightly. Still nervous, she was afraid of accidentally touching the egg, but she calmed down and carefully put it back in place. Martina wondered where the prophet's promised way to protect the child was, and anxiety mixed with anticipation. She soon noticed a notice about an ancient recipe for raising a sacred beast, given by the prophet himself. It was reported that the sacred beast and the parents are one and the same, and the well-being of the beast is linked to the prosperity of the country. In order for the beast to grow, the pillars of the state had to perform a kiss of loyalty to the parent, transferring life energy to it. The pillars of the state were considered the greatest talents without which the country could not prosper, and their strength directly influenced the growth of the beast. Martina learned that the kiss of fidelity involved touching one's lips to a part of one's parent's body, with a complete sense of devotion and loyalty. Having studied ancient books about the sacred beast, she discovered a secret method for accelerating the creature's maturation, but she understood the difficulty of its application. Getting the kiss of allegiance from the pillars of the state was not easy. Her reputation was terrible, and trust in her was almost non-existent. Since childhood, she fought with her brother for the right to inherit, often clashing with him in fights even among noble ladies, which made her famous and infamous. The princess's fiery temper was constantly condemned in aristocratic society, but she knew that for the sake of the child, she would have to change. She sighed heavily, realizing that for the sake of her daughter's future, she needed to control her emotions and actions. The princess wanted to become a mother who could help her child grow up healthy and strong, so that her daughter could be proud of her. She eagerly awaited the birth of her daughter, imagining how she would open her eyes and smile back at her. Closing her eyes, the princess mentally relived the most unforgettable moment of her daughter's birth, filling her heart with warmth and joy. Soon a maid and a knight entered. Louise greeted her mistress with a smile and announced that she had come to help her. Linny informed the princess that she should review her schedule, reminding her of the important activities of the day ahead. Martina looked sternly at her subordinates and menacingly demanded that they come to her. The girls exchanged frightened glances, but obeyed. With a soft smile, the princess asked them to kiss her on the cheek, as if testing their trust and loyalty. The girls were taken aback for a moment, not expecting such a request, but soon they came and obediently carried it out. After the kiss, the princess noticed her brother's spy among those close to her, and her heart sank with anxiety. In a past life, the guard stood up for the princess, for which she lost her knighthood and was reduced to a commoner. The maid married a nobleman from her brother's circle and enjoyed a life of luxury, which only intensified the feeling of loss. Martina regretted that in her past life she had been cold to those around her, not knowing who was hiding the betrayal. In this life, she intended to act differently. She thanked the girls with a gentle smile for their care and devotion and announced they had a day off. The girls thanked him with tears in their eyes, rejoicing at the unexpected favor. The princess let them go with a smile, realizing that this was the first step to improving her reputation and strengthening her trust. She understood perfectly well that she had to lull the spy's vigilance by acting carefully and wisely. Soon the young ladies were going about their business, enjoying a well-deserved day off. Louise noticed the princess's secretary on her way and, smiling, announced that the lady had been given the day off, giving a detailed account of what had happened. The experience of exile in her past life taught her a lot about people, and she did not forget the secretary, who had grown up next to her since childhood. Soon the young man entered the room and bowed warmly to the princess, causing mixed emotions in her. The young princess saw her friend with horror and tremblingly called him to her. She rushed towards him, joyfully exclaiming that he was alive. He watched her behavior with bewilderment, not understanding the reason for her delight. Miel looked at the princess with slight concern, admitting that he was simply curious about what had happened to her. A moment later, he noticed tears in her eyes, and she repeated with a smile that he was alive, and that was the main thing. One scene from his past life remained a nightmare forever. On the way to exile, he sacrificed himself to save her. Pierced by the sword, Miel looked at the princess with a gentle smile, hurrying her and silently suggesting that she must survive. Miel looked at the princess in shock. He had known her for a long time, but this was the first time he had seen her cry, and he was trying to understand what had happened. Martina said, with a soft smile, that she had a dream that something had happened to him, and her heart sank with fear. She added with a smile that this wasn't likely to happen, since he had to serve her for another 100 years, and the lightness returned to her voice. Looking at the secretary, she decided to test his fidelity and asked him to kiss her on the cheek, watching his reaction. He looked away sheepishly, realizing she was teasing him again. But the princess threatened to cut his salary if he refused. Miel sighed heavily, acknowledging her waywardness, and unable to refuse her, he obediently kissed her on the cheek. She noticed that he was not a pillar of the state, but his loyalty was unconditional, and this warmed her heart. The princess understood that the true pillars of a country are the people who influence the entire nation, and in her past life, exile had led to the emergence of many talents. She realized that she could use her past life memories to attract the right people to her goal in advance. Then she asked the secretary to tell her about the schedule for the day so that she could plan every step wisely. The young man spoke in detail about all the planned activities, but the princess noted that she would be bored and did not want to go to banal meetings. In a past life, tea parties turned into empty amusements, and the whole day was taken up by meaningless dog dates. Miel announced that her brother was throwing a ball that evening, but the princess understood that their tense relationship would make it awkward for her to participate. Martina, with a satisfied smile, told the secretary that she would still go to the ball, deciding to use it as an opportunity. She knew that the future god of war would appear there, Lian Hisning the Younger, prince of the neighboring empire and pillar of the state. The prince was not only a favorite of his court, but also, having left the palace as a teenager, he traveled alone, later joining the mercenaries, which was considered a disgrace. However, the years of war restored his honor. He brought victory to his homeland and received the title of Black God of War. The prince's feud with their country began at that same ball, when a nobleman hired him as a bodyguard, and he accidentally ran into another noble lady. The event disgusted and frightened the lady, and she called him a dirty mercenary and demanded that he not touch her. Prince Mayfield defended the girl and drove the young man away, reinforcing the princess's impression of noble rules. She realized that if she could help him overcome these difficulties, then perhaps she will receive a kiss of fidelity from him and strengthen future relations between the countries. At that moment, she asked the secretary to prepare the most beautiful dress for her, because the ball was her chance to show herself, and he agreed with a sigh. In her past life, the princess had tense relations with the nobility, and she rarely attended balls, avoiding their fuss and intrigue. Now she wondered whether it was worth trying to establish connections with them, weighing the possible benefits and risks. The princess greeted Madame, but she only responded with a puzzled expression, showing neither friendliness nor interest. Martina looked gloomily at Brother Edgar and asked why he hadn't said hello when they met. He noted with mockery that she had always despised them and wondered why she had decided to join the ball. The princess replied with a slight mockery that sometimes she was simply interested in watching the dancing and the movements of the audience, when similar things were done by simple-minded people. She was taken aback when she noticed how the young man looked at her angrily, not expecting such insolence. The prince approached his sister with a haughty grin, greeting her as if testing her courage and determination. He turned to the young man and asked him to go dancing. Edgar smiled and thanked the prince for his attention. Mayfield watched his sister closely, but did not ask why she came to his ball, since she clearly did not like such events. The princess said that she just wanted to dance, and he mockingly reminded her that everyone despised her, and no one wanted to dance with her. He glanced at the guests and with a sly smile declared that she was a princess who had not been invited to dance. The conversation threatened to erupt into a scandal, and those present quietly waited to see how the tension between them would end. Mayfield grinned and offered to bow her head and ask for a dance, but the princess firmly rejected his offer. A scream echoed through the hall. A young lady was screaming at the dirty mercenary, demanding that he not touch her. Martina whispered to herself, with a satisfied smile, that she had already found a suitable dance partner, feeling the joy of the upcoming moment. In the eyes of the aristocrats, mercenaries were nothing more than dogs. Loyalty, land, and servants were worth only money, and fighting power could be sold to anyone who paid. Today, they fought for one side, and tomorrow they could serve against the same empire, driven only by gold. All it took was a payment, and the aristocrat could command the dog as he pleased, without regard for his honor or principles. A noble lady of high birth, well known in high society, created a scandal involving a mercenary wanting to assert her status. The employer, fearing the consequences for the lady's reputation, shifted all the blame onto the mercenary, concealing his true origin. If he had not intervened thoughtfully, it could have caused a conflict between the countries, so he remained silent, keeping the situation under control. Only in the future, during the war between the countries, did he tell his subordinates about the bitter memory when he had to choose between honor and duty. The man, with a slight smile, tried to calm the ladies and end the scandal, but the tension in the room continued to grow. Soon the princess's cry was heard. She demanded that the young man be released and declared that he was her dance partner. The young man looked at her in surprise, not expecting such courage and directness. Martina firmly declared that she had chosen him, and no one dared take her companion away, demonstrating an unwavering will. The young lady was taken aback, and the princess noted with a smile that the young man had only nudged her slightly. The princess casually promised to compensate for all the damage with new clothes, and judging by the girl's screams, there was no injury. The young lady was furious, unable to understand how the princess could dance with the shameful mercenary, calling into question the honor of the royal family. The princess looked at the young man with a smile and asked if he had heard all the words said, as if testing his courage. She looked at him with a smirk and declared that she was a crazy princess and asked if he had the courage to dance with her. The young man looked at the princess in surprise, because he had never expected such an unexpected act from her. A moment later, he came closer and noticed that in his homeland, strong women were compared to spirited war horses worthy only of the bravest warriors. He bowed low, respectfully accepting her challenge and thanking her for the honor. He then kissed her hand discreetly and accepted her invitation to dance, causing a quiet whisper among the guests. The young man glanced briefly at the prince, as if assessing his reaction to what was happening. Mayfield noted with a slight smile that his sister had always been known for her extravagant behavior. However, he was sure that in the end she would still turn to him for help, because he remained her brother. Meanwhile, the young princess happily whirled around in the dance with her companion, enjoying the unexpected freedom. The young man quietly thanked her for her help, acknowledging her courage in front of the entire room. Martina made it clear with a smile that she could not stand hypocritical aristocrats who spoke of honor but intimidated the weak. Leon acknowledged her actions and offered to fulfill one of her wishes in gratitude. Realizing the value of the moment, the princess wondered what request she could entrust to him. He hinted that he was capable of guarding her for a month, fighting for her, or even taking the life of any enemy. Martina sighed heavily and thoughtfully entertained the idea of ordering the life of a prince of some country. Leanne looked at her carefully and calmly made it clear that such a thing was possible for him. He came closer and quietly hinted that for such a request she would have to buy his whole life. When the dance was over, the princess bowed to her companion and made it clear that she was not interested in murder. With a mysterious smile, she suggested meeting alone, hinting at another idea. The young man became embarrassed and politely refused to accompany her, leaving her in a state of unexpected bewilderment. The princess froze in shock because she did not expect to hear a refusal at all. That evening at the palace, Martina sighed heavily, trying to understand how anyone could dare to reject her proposal. Miel ironically recalled that her character had always been domineering and even frightening to those around her. The princess thought about the note with the OOE address left by the young man, because she still wanted to receive a kiss of fidelity from him. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the egg. It began to move, and a notification appeared that the sacred beast was hungry. The princess knew that all the suffering of exile and the painful rebirth had been endured for the sake of this long-awaited moment. At that very moment, she announced that the sacred beast was hungry, and her words caused genuine bewilderment in the secretary. The young man noticed that it was dangerous to hold the egg like that, and gently reminded him that it was better to put it down. Suddenly, they both froze, surprised to see the egg trembling right in her hands. The princess noticed with a joyful smile that she was right, and her heart filled with hope. Miel carefully suggested that the sacred beast would soon hatch, and there was excitement in his voice. He immediately realized that he needed to take care of the room temperature so that the little creature would feel safe. Servants were ordered to spray fragrant oils to fill the room with a soft and calming scent. A moment later, quiet music, created specifically to calm the egg, began to sound in the chambers. The princess noted with a slight smile that her secretary was remarkably reminiscent of her own mother. Miel only smiled and admitted that he remained only a servant of the villainous, obliged to protect what was dear to his mistress. Martina felt embarrassed and smiled softly, because these words unexpectedly warmed her heart. But deep down, she was troubled by the memory of a past life where her child was born seriously ill. Then the baby lived less than a day, and even the most powerful magic could not save her from death. The girl took her last breath in her mother's arms, leaving behind emptiness and despair. Now the princess understood that she would not allow that tragedy to repeat itself and must change her fate at any cost. Knowing that the mercenary was one of the pillars of the state, she decided to obtain a kiss of loyalty from him. Soon the princess announced that she had to go on important business and left the palace. After some time, she arrived at the hotel and learned that the mercenary had headed to the cemetery. The realization came instantly. Today was the anniversary of his mother's death. The young man's father, Ryan Shinning, was the ruler of a neighboring empire. His mother was a noble lady from the Morin Empire, whose fate turned out to be tragic. Despite her family's prohibitions, she ran away with the emperor and gave birth to a child, leaving her home country. However, in the new empire, she was met with only ridicule and coldness, and she could not find peace there. Eventually, the woman died of severe depression and was buried on her native soil. As a mercenary, Leon often returned to Moran to visit his mother's grave. He wanted to take her things from the family home, but her relatives refused to give them up, not wanting to acknowledge him. Hearing a familiar voice, the young man turned around and froze in surprise. The princess approached him and greeted him calmly, as if their meeting was predetermined. Martina smiled softly and said that she had brought a gift for him. He didn't understand why she came here, but she only offered to open the box. When the lid lifted, he froze in shock at the sight of his mother's things. The princess reassured him, assuring him that she had not revealed his true identity to anyone. She admitted that she noticed his eyes, which resembled the noble Vitas family, and did a little investigating. Lean was stunned and did not understand how she managed to get hold of things that the family had carefully hidden. Martina just smiled and noted that sometimes even a reputation as a villain can be useful. He admitted with a grateful smile that he did not know how he could repay such a gift. Being the most unloved prince, he had no support either at court or among his brothers. His mother's family had long since turned their backs on him and preferred to pretend that he did not exist. All that was left in his life was a sword in his hand and a faithful horse behind his back. Lian dropped to one knee and identified himself as a homeless animal whose life now belonged to the princess. He asked who he should bite to death for her, but Martina only smiled softly. She admitted that she did not need blood and offered to become his home. The princess promised to give him what others could not and to stand by his side against all enemies. With a serious look, she said that she would no longer allow him to remain a lonely beast. Lian froze in shock, because since childhood he had been used to walking through the world alone. And yet, at that moment, he felt someone carefully making their way into his heart. Before his eyes, the image of a little girl seemed to appear, extending a helping hand to him, a gesture that turned out to be stronger for him than any oath. He asked with interest whether she had really decided to tame a wild beast and make it live for her. The princess just smiled, noting that the union of a beast and a villain sounded quite funny. Lian chuckled and admitted that she was truly incredible, calling her a crazy princess. A moment later, he leaned over and kissed her hand, solemnly pledging his allegiance. He acknowledged that from that moment on, it became his home, and the sacred beast's energy began to fill up. But soon the princess was taken aback to learn that the beast had already gained enough power and was about to hatch. She was shocked because she didn't expect everything to happen so quickly. Lian frowned and asked if she had changed her mind. Noticing the fear in her eyes, the princess flushed and sharply made it clear that she never changed her mind at the last moment. Martina then ordered her guard to go to the palace immediately. Linny carefully noted that they would arrive only by noon, but the princess understood that it was too late. At that moment, she froze in surprise. When Lian threw his cloak over her, Martina flared up with anger, declaring that she didn't need other people's things and that the cold didn't frighten her at all. Then the young man calmly picked her up in his arms and explained that there would be a strong wind during the race. Having seated her on the horse, Lian warned her that he would take her faster, although the road would be difficult. The princess flared with determination and shouted that she didn't care about the cold, as long as she got to the palace faster. Hearing this, the young warrior only smiled, jumped on his horse, and they quickly rushed towards the palace. After some time, the young people reached the imperial palace, and the cold wind was still ringing in their ears. The princess thanked her companion for his help and promised to contact him as soon as she had taken care of her child. Lian grabbed her hand in surprise and asked her in confusion if she really had a child. Martina confirmed with a joyful smile that she had a child and hurried to the palace. For a moment, the young man looked after her in stunned silence, unable to believe what he had heard. His thoughts were racing, and he involuntarily wondered who the child's father was. In a fit of jealousy, he even imagined how he could kill this man. But a moment later, Lian sighed heavily, realizing that this would only provoke her anger and hatred. Meanwhile, in the palace, all the servants crowded around the egg, which began to crack alarmingly. Those present almost begged the sacred beast to wait a little longer until the princess returned. But soon there was a loud cracking sound of shells, and the air filled with tension. They couldn't bear it any longer and screamed as the cracks in the egg began to widen rapidly. At that moment, Martina burst into the room and loudly reproached everyone for the noise. In fact, her heart was pounding wildly as the fear of the past came back to life in her memory. In her past life, her child died immediately after birth, and this moment became her eternal nightmare. Now she trembled with anxiety, afraid to see the pain and weakness of a newborn again. But a moment later, a tiny and incredibly cute sacred beast appeared before her. The creature quietly called her mother, and the princess's heart filled with warmth. Enchanted by his beauty, Martina hugged the child tightly and thanked fate for his safe birth. At the same time, a sacred beast also hatched in the prince's chambers. The prince saw a sweet creature, but hid his emotions under a cold mask. One of the servants congratulated him on the birth of the beast, but also reported that the same thing had happened to his sister. Hearing this, the prince looked furiously at his assistant because he had ordered the poisoning of his sister's egg. The realization of failure caused an icy fury in his gaze because the order had not been completed. Martina looked at her little daughter with a tender smile, touched by the way she calmly drank milk. She knew that sacred beasts had the intelligence of a 3-year-old child from birth, so she understood perfectly well that her girl was already capable of understanding what was happening and simultaneously absorbing magical power. The princess was soon informed that the beast only weakly absorbed magic through human food, and therefore required kisses of fidelity to fully grow. Martina understood this perfectly well, and thought that she could hire a mercenary as a bodyguard for a while. However, at that very moment, she was taken aback by a warning. If the pillar of the nation does not accumulate combat experience, he could lose his status. She realized that if Leanne stopped wandering the world, he might never become that formidable god of war. The princess frowned because her own actions could change his fate, and this was becoming a serious problem. At that moment, the little baby, with a joyful smile, reached out to her mother and demanded a kiss. Martina froze for a moment, struck by this sweet request and even slightly embarrassed. But then she kissed her daughter tenderly and cast aside her worries, deciding that she would do everything possible for her. After looking closely at the tiny creature, the princess affectionately named her Lily. The sacred animal was slightly surprised by the new name, as if listening to its sound. Martina smiled softly and, looking at Lily, promised that she would live a long and happy life. At the same moment, a notification came that their connection had become even stronger. A few moments later, young men entered the room and respectfully greeted the princess. The maid announced that it was time to feed the sacred beast and handed over a new bottle of milk. Miel said with a slight smile that the news of the birth of the sacred beast had already reached the emperor and was quickly spreading among the nobility. He also reported that the princess's brother also had his own sacred beast. Martina only smiled calmly after hearing this news. Suddenly, Lily reached out to Miel and naively asked her mother if he was her father. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Everyone present froze in surprise. Miel instantly blushed with embarrassment and was at a loss for words. Finally, he sighed heavily, looked away, and quietly admitted that this was not true at all. Martina smiled cheerfully and noted that if he really were a dad, he would be bullied by 2 women at once, his wife and his daughter. Miel just smiled in response and reminded her that she knew perfectly well that he was still alone. Miel just looked at the sacred animal with a smile and calmly stated that he was not a dad at all, but just the princess's servant, her slave, whom she loved to tease the most. Martina immediately looked at him in shock and instantly covered her daughter's ears so that she would not hear such words. Miel looked at the princess in surprise and asked if Lily was the name of the sacred beast. Lily smiled happily and confirmed that that was her name. A moment later, the princess was already looking at her subordinate with a stern gaze and asked if he had checked the maid. Miel confidently replied that he had conducted a thorough check and found nothing suspicious. At the same time, he sincerely did not understand why the princess suddenly started talking about the maid in such a tone. Martina could not explain to him the real reason, but deep down she was sure that the maid had betrayed her. In her past life, it was the maid who had put poison in her daughter's milk. Therefore, the princess now decided to strengthen the egg's security in advance to prevent a repetition of the tragedy. She assumed that her older brother had bribed the maid, but she still did not understand why she had agreed to betray her. Martina suspected that the girl could have been blackmailed or forced. Miel suggested simply firing the maid if the princess really didn't trust her. But Martina shook her head and calmly noted that being fired without cause could seriously damage her reputation. She then quietly added that if she wanted to defeat her elder brother and make her daughter the sacred beast of the empire, she would have to act carefully and be a wise mother. At this time, in the palace kitchen, the maid Louise, trembling with fear, slowly stirred the poison into warm milk. She remembered a recent argument with her friend, who accidentally saw her preparations. The girl understood perfectly well that she was doing a terrible thing, but she believed that she had no other choice. Sometime later, Louise entered the princess's chambers with a bottle of poisoned milk. With a forced smile, she said that she had warmed up the milk, and in an hour it would be ready to give to the sacred beast. After these words, Louise hurried away, hoping to leave the room as quickly as possible. However, Martina stopped her in a cold voice and said that she needed help. Louise froze in place, not daring to look up at the princess. In a trembling voice, she asked how she could help. Martina looked at her slowly and ordered her to drink the milk she had just brought. Louise turned pale and froze in a daze, realizing that she could not drink the very milk that was intended for the sacred beast. The princess looked at the maid with a predatory grin. Her gaze conveyed the cold confidence of a person who already senses a lie and intends to bring the truth to light. Martina slowly pulled the bottle closer to her face. Her calm seemed far more terrifying than any rage. The maid froze, unable to utter a word. Her lips trembled, and her eyes darted about as if seeking salvation. Suddenly, the princess abruptly removed the bottle. Tension hung in the room, as if something inevitable was about to happen. At that moment, her subordinate brought the woman into the room, carefully supporting her by the arm. The young man moved slowly and carefully, as if he was afraid of causing her unnecessary pain. Her mother stood before her, tired but alive, with a quiet and warm smile. The girl jumped up and rushed towards her, like a child who had lived in fear for too long. The mother gently touched her face and carefully ran her hand through her daughter's hair. There was gratitude in her eyes and a quiet joy that they were close again. Louise couldn't bear it and burst into tears, feeling the heavy burden of despair leaving her heart. She was ready to commit any sin, just to save her mother from pain and darkness. Martina watched calmly as it happened, and a shadow of understanding flashed in her eyes. She knew how far a person could go when the life of a loved one was at stake. The princess reminded her of the ring that Louise had stolen for treatment, but there was no anger in her behavior, only cold calculation and a slight mockery of fate. She decided to simply deduct the cost of the ring from the maid's salary. Louise looked at the princess in shock, not believing what she heard. Martina smiled slightly, because the whole court had long called her a cruel villain, but deep down, she still remained a mother who understood the pain of others. She looked at Louise with unexpected respect, because the girl had risked everything for her mother, and under that heavy gaze, the maid could no longer hide the truth. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she confessed to the terrible deed. The poison was indeed in the milk, and behind her stood people who threatened her and demanded the death of the sacred beast. Louise, choking with bitter tears, admitted her guilt and promised to tell the princess everything without concealment, no longer trying to hide the truth. Martina listened to her attentively, but then gently remarked that the girl should first spend time with her mother, since they had been separated for too long. The princess watched them go with a quiet smile, feeling a rare peace and satisfaction at how this difficult situation had been resolved. Miel was genuinely surprised that the princess did not punish the maid immediately, but instead instructed him to look after her mother. Martina only smiled slightly and asked ironically if he really considered her a vengeful and heartless princess. Miel hastened to object, smiling softly and assuring her that she had misunderstood his thoughts. Then the princess smiled and noticed that all this was given away by his eyes, which she had long considered too cunning. Martina smiled mysteriously and added that there were still many actions ahead of him that could truly surprise him. Miel watched her silently, still not fully understanding what was happening. He clearly saw that outwardly she remained the same princess, but her character seemed to have changed beyond recognition. The old Martina would never have allowed herself to be deceived and would have crushed without hesitation anyone who dared to touch her. Because of her harsh nature, she made countless enemies, and the nobility and common people alike called her a witch and a villain. And yet, even in this cold and dangerous girl, there was a strange, almost inexplicable charm, a charm that for some reason only he noticed. Mael thoughtfully asked himself what could have changed the princess so much, and perhaps it was her new role as a mother that made her look at the world differently. But somewhere deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much more serious had happened, something he still knew nothing about. The news that two sacred beasts had hatched at the same time instantly shook the entire empire, causing a commotion among the nobility and the people. The empire's sacred beast had a unique method of reproduction, known only to a limited number of magicians and sages. When the life of the last emperor was drawing to an end, a sacred beast would lay an egg destined for the future heir. The egg was passed on to the rightful heir. Only he was capable of raising the beast and becoming the true ruler. An heir who failed to raise a sacred beast was considered alien to the imperial blood and was accused of witchcraft, which was considered a grave crime. The current emperor had been suffering from a serious illness for several years, but his sacred beast still laid a few eggs. This meant that both of the emperor's children had a right to the throne, and the history of the empire had never before encountered such a situation. The Council of Nobility decided that the heir would be the one who could first raise the sacred beast to prove his right to the throne. But both animals hatched at the same time, and so a council was urgently called, to which the determined princess went. Miel watched the princess carefully, trying to figure out if she was truly excited about the council. Martina sighed heavily, feeling the pressure of all eyes, the hostility of the nobility, and the threat of losing her status in the imperial family. She knew that evil tongues were already waiting for a reason to accuse her daughter, doubting the princess's ability to raise a sacred beast. It was the first time Miel had seen her confused, but he noted with a smile that she still looked like a rushing chariot, sweeping away obstacles in her path. The princess smiled, wondering if he still considered her human, and not just strength and determination. Miel confidently said that her smile already gave him courage, and that with her, it was enough to enter the council for all difficulties to seem to dissolve. The news was spread at the noble council. The eldest prince had successfully bred his sacred beast, causing surprise and tension among the nobility. The news that the princess had also successfully bred the sacred beast stirred the hall, causing the nobles to whisper anxiously. The judge recalled that the imperial tradition states that the heir who manages to raise the sacred beast receives the throne. However, there have never been several animals hatched at the same time in history. The decision now depended on the opinion of the nobility and the emperor. The empress watched the children closely, as if weighing their fates with her gaze. The emperor noted the unexpectedness of the event with a caustic grin, emphasizing that no one had been able to prove their superiority, and there was a hint of irony in his words. The prince, with a sly smile, suggested that his sister could voluntarily give up the throne, recalling the recent events at the reception and subtly pushing her towards a decision. Lily exploded with rage, instantly defending her mother's honor, and her scream tore through the hall, drawing the attention of everyone present. The emperor's sacred beast roared. The tension in the hall instantly increased, and the beast's gaze seemed to pierce everyone present. Martina glared at her brother, demanding an explanation and not giving him a chance to justify himself. Her determination was palpable in every gesture. She took out a small bottle of milk from her pocket, and everyone present noticed her unusual and alarming object. The prince, with a mocking grin, was perplexed, not understanding why the princess brought a baby bottle at such an important moment. Martina openly accused the maid of bribing her to poison the sacred beast, demonstratively showing the danger hidden in the bottle. She added that she had examined the potion and discovered that its recipe was known only to powerful wizards who served the prince, which emphasized the scale of the conspiracy. The princess sighed heavily, her determination filling the hall with strength, and she made it clear that the dangerous prince was not worthy of the crown. Her gaze pierced her brother, fury and confidence mixed in her every movement, causing tension in everyone present. Rumors and whispers instantly spread throughout the hall. The noble advisors hesitated, but they understood internally that the choice must lean towards the princess. The emperor raised his hand, instantly stopping all conversation, and addressed his son, demanding an explanation or justification for his past actions. Mayfield, with a satisfied grin, stated that, by a lucky chance, his wizard was waiting outside, so he ordered the guards to bring him in. The princess knew that in a past life the prince used magic to kill her daughter. She wondered if this was the chance to overthrow him in this life. A moment later, the guards brought the wizard into the hall. The man bowed low, greeting everyone, and the prince stated that his sister had claimed that there had been an attempt to poison the sacred beast. He looked at his subordinate with a fierce grin and declared that only he knew how to create this product. The evidence was irrefutable. At that very moment, the man fell to his knees and declared in front of everyone that the potions were indeed his doing, but he acted alone, and the prince knew nothing about it. The man declared that he was not worthy of forgiveness for attempting to harm the sacred beast, so he intended to pay with his life to prove the prince's innocence. At that very moment, he used magic and set himself on fire. The princess froze in place, as she did not expect such a thing. At this, all the knights rushed to the emperor, as they feared for his life. Everyone present was shocked by this, but a moment later, they only saw the charred body of the wizard. After everything that had happened, the prince looked at his sister with a fierce grin and declared that he had avenged her. But at the same time, he asked if she was happy now. Martina was shocked that he had sacrificed an experienced wizard for his own skin. She screamed that nothing could be proven based only on the words of a wizard. Then the emperor became ill, and the empress declared that they must stop this. As she left, the empress told her daughter that she believed her brother had not tried to harm her, but she stated that the question of the succession to the throne would be decided the following month. As she left, the princess froze, as if the wind had stopped when the prince called her, making her heart beat faster. He looked at her with a cheeky grin, a subtle spark of challenge burning in his eyes, and reminded her how their pride and treachery were mirror images. His icy gaze pierced her, and the words about bloody and identical eyes made her blood run cold. Martina responded with a fierce grin, her anger flashing like lightning, and she declared that if he didn't like the eyes, he could gouge them out himself. The prince coldly reminded them of their father's weakness and their mother's power, of magic bound by contracts, and the submissiveness of noble houses, creating an atmosphere of threat. He added with icy determination that he was almost in power, dreaming of setting her eyes in a crown like precious stones, turning her into a plaything for his ambitions. The princess could not stand it. Anger flared up within her, and she pushed her brother away with a force that shook the space around her. Her heart was on fire. She declared that she would never again allow him to take what was hers, and this time she intended to win. Mayfield looked at her with an icy grin, a cruel mockery playing in his eyes, and he declared that he longed to hear her beg for mercy. After some time, the princess walked back to the castle, her heart heavy, as memories of her past life again hung like dark clouds. In that life, her child had been poisoned and she had been exiled, left on the brink of death. And these thoughts gripped Martina's chest with a cold grip. She understood perfectly well that losing to her brother would be worse than death itself, because every effort, every step she took gave her a chance to save her daughter and her future. Thoughts of a repeat of the tragedy burned her, and she swore that she would never allow history to repeat itself again. At that moment, she turned to her subordinate, hoping to find in him support and strength amidst the storms of emotions. But suddenly, Martina was taken aback when she saw that they were making funny faces, trying to amuse her, and this caused an unexpected explosion of emotions. Unable to contain herself, the princess laughed, sincerely and infectiously, her laughter mixed with lightness and surprise, because she did not understand what made them so happy. Lily looked at her mother with a gentle smile, filling the room with warmth, and said that Miel said that such pranks lifted the mood, wishing that her mother would not be sad anymore. Lily looked at her mother curiously, her eyes shining with bewilderment, like little sparks, eager to understand what had happened. Martina, with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, acknowledged the fear and weakness she felt for her daughter's safety. A moment later, she smiled, glowing with inner courage, because her daughter had given her the strength to stop being afraid. The princess kissed Lily tenderly, feeling that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. Lily promised with trepidation to always be there, like a little light that warmed her mother's heart. The girl kissed her mother tenderly, whispering that she should not cry anymore, and there was so much pure love in it. The young man watched, joy filling his eyes, because the princess had regained her confidence and strength. He saw her determination to protect her loved ones, and this sight warmed his soul like a ray of sunshine. Many years ago, the princess and her brother shared a table, and the first sparks of future conflicts were still in the air. Miel walked slowly up, holding the dessert, and the slight smile on his face seemed to reflect the warm, sunny day. The princess noticed the boy whose eyes sparkled like emeralds, and that moment made her heart flutter. Martina noted with genuine delight the beauty of his gaze, the brightness of which resembled the sunny greenery of a garden. The prince laughed, surprised by such a poetic comparison, although inwardly he chuckled at the boy's mentor. Miel was taken aback, but deep down he felt proud of the recognition that he was valued and noticed. The princess allowed him to be free, pointing out that he should not pay attention to the angry prince, who seemed to have hit like a hurricane. The prince, feeling challenged, only glared at the boy, seething with anger and discontent. In the evening, Miel brought water to the prince, his heart beating fast, fearing the wrath of the ruler. The prince, while accepting the glass, suddenly dropped it, and Miel was confused and worried that he had caused harm. The prince mockingly inquired about the cost of servants that could be bought with a broken glass, causing horror in Miel. The prince's gaze was menacing, and he ordered the guards to break the boy's arms and legs, coldly enjoying the fear. Guards burst into the room, their faces stony, and young Miel lay on the floor, trembling. They grabbed the boy and threw him on the floor, while the prince watched the scene with fury and satisfaction. The prince grinned, enjoying the servant's pain, as if it were a game where the stakes were life. The princess burst into the room, her eyes blazing, and she ordered the servant to be released immediately. She looked at her brother with determination, not intending to give in, like a rock before a storm. The prince declared punishment for the misdeed, but Martina knew the boy was innocent, and this increased her anger. Mayfield approached, mockingly asking if she dared to contradict for the sake of a simple servant, insignificant as a weed. Martina responded angrily that even the weed was her choice, and it was her right. She looked at the boy lying quietly on the floor, and her heart sank with tenderness. Coming closer, she extended her hand and asked if he wanted to become her servant, opening a new trust. The princess confidently stated that if he agreed, she would protect him from all threats. Miel looked at her hopefully, feeling their connection grow stronger like invisible threads. He took the princess's hand, and at that moment, a feeling of new destiny and loyalty arose within him. Later, the princess returned to the room, her heart full of anger, because her brother still remained a threat. The young man sighed heavily and thanked the princess for saving him, his soul warmed by the warmth of her determination. Martina remembered her brother with fury, despising his psychopathy, promising to take revenge sooner or later. She stated that a doctor would soon come and heal his hand, and Miel hastened to express his gratitude to the princess. Martina, surprised, did not understand how he could repay, since a servant, in her opinion, had to carry out all orders. A trembling and embarrassed Miel confessed that he would wear glasses so that only she could see his eyes, shining like precious stones. The princess was taken aback. Embarrassment overwhelmed her completely. She did not expect such a frank gesture. Turning around, she declared that although he could do whatever he wanted, his work would still be continuous, and Miel agreed with a smile. Miel asked with interest what the princess was planning, given the prince's enormous power and numerous contracts with powerful mages. He added that most of the mages who signed a contract were mid-ranking, and her alliance with a high-ranking mage would raise her status. Martina agreed with him, deciding that a truly outstanding mage was needed to support her goals. She was looking not just for a high-ranking mage, but for someone who would one day become legendary, capable of changing the course of history. A few days later, the princess walked anxiously around the room, looking in every corner because she could not find her little daughter. Martina gently explained that she would have to leave on important business, and Lily would have to play with her secretary in the meantime. She looked around in confusion, not understanding whether her daughter was there, while Lily, with a sly smile and shining eyes, hid in the closet. A few minutes later, the girl suddenly jumped out of the closet and cheerfully scared her mother, laughing loudly at her own prank. Lily happily said that she really wanted to play with her mother, and the princess warmly admitted that she also dreamed of spending time with her. But important matters awaited her, and duty again called the princess to leave the palace. She needed to fill the sacred beast with energy so that it would grow stronger, so she had to go on business urgently. Miel took Lily's hand with a gentle smile and assured the princess that he would take care of her and give her new toys. Martina smiled and said that she was going to visit the wizard, because a successful contract would rid her daughter of her fear of dark magic. Having said this, she got ready to leave, and the young man quietly wished her good luck. At that moment, Lily looked at him carefully and called out quietly. With a sly smile, she asked if he really wanted to go with her mother that much, and Miel looked confused and surprised by such a question. Lily noticed that every time his mother left, he looked at her as if he was afraid he would never see her again. Miel admitted with a gentle smile that he was already happy to have the opportunity to help the princess and did not dare dream of more. He then asked Lily with a smile if she wanted to play, and the girl happily said that she loved to draw. After some time, the princess arrived at the hotel, but the mercenary was not there, which seemed extremely strange to her. She found this suspicious, since she had asked him to come to the magic tower to exchange oaths of allegiance again. Martina wondered if he had regretted his vow by getting involved with a woman the entire court called a villain. However, she had already sent a request to visit the magic tower and decided to head there first. The princess knew that the future legendary magician named Phoenix was now just a student of this tower. Martina also knew that today was the day he was going to be expelled from the academy. At this time, the professor was furiously shouting at the student, accusing him of breaking the rules and failing to submit the assignment. The young man, in despair, insisted that he had done everything honestly, but someone had replaced his work. The professor was shocked because it was hard to believe that noble students were capable of such meanness. Meanwhile, his classmates looked at the young man with mocking grins. One of them dismissively declared that he was nothing but trash. They mocked him for having to rummage through garbage and work in the kitchen, and asked why such a person needed magic. The professor said coldly that the magic tower did not tolerate students like Phoenix. He then announced that from that day on, the young man was no longer a student of the tower. Phoenix, barely containing his rage, silently agreed with the decision. But then, with a cheeky smile, he declared that he would still study magic and one day create a power they had never even dreamed of. The professor shouted that this was presumptuous, because the magic tower was the pinnacle of all magical art. Their argument was suddenly interrupted by a maid entering the auditorium. She approached the professor and quietly told him something important. The professor stopped the student and informed him that the tower had received a request from a high-ranking guest. He said that she wanted to become the boy's sponsor, and Phoenix froze for a moment in shock. Later, as they walked down the corridor to the living room, the professor sternly told the young man to watch his words before meeting the lady. Phoenix was confused and didn't know who would want to meet him, but when the door opened, he froze in amazement, seeing before him the beautiful princess of their empire. After some time, the professor greeted the princess with a forced smile and introduced the young man, but hastened to point out that there were far more worthy candidates among the tower's students. He emphasized that the magic tower was home to many talented students who, in his opinion, were much more deserving of patronage. The professor added that Phoenix had already broken the rules more than once and had even been involved in stealing things from a noble student. Phoenix only chuckled, remaining calm, because deep down he considered such accusations empty and meaningless. He reminded the student that no matter how much effort was put into the assignments, the result was still given a low grade. The professor instantly flared up with anger and sharply reprimanded the student, demanding restraint and respect from him. The princess watched them closely, because she knew very well that it was on this day that he was expelled from the magic tower in his past life. After his exile, the young man returned to his native village and lived there for many years, remaining a simple man far from fame. However, even without mentors and rare magical materials, he never stopped practicing magic for a moment. He trained with persistence, using everything he found in the fields and forests, turning simple things into tools for practice. Magic seemed to respond to his persistence and never betrayed his efforts. Over time, his experiments led to the creation of truly amazing charms. His discoveries once amazed the entire world of magic and caused the magic tower to tremble in amazement. Then many in the tower bitterly regretted their decision and tried to turn it back. Although life in the village had hardened his talent, the path was difficult and full of hardships, and the princess clearly understood that under her protection he would have been able to reveal his genius much earlier. A moment later, she calmly asked to speak with the young man alone. The professor glanced at the princess with a polite smile and allowed them to be alone, but his gaze still concealed a stern wariness. However, as soon as he turned to the student, he sharply scolded him, demanding that he behave respectfully and not forget his manners in front of such a high-born guest. A moment later, the door closed, and they were left alone in a quiet, spacious room filled with heavy anticipation. Martina calmly announced that she was ready to take on all the expenses of his education in the magic tower. She also made it clear that no matter what difficulties his path might bring, he would always be able to rely on her support. With a slight smile, the princess made it clear that she did not care about rumors and other people's words, and invited him to accept her patronage. The young man was momentarily confused and froze, as if trying to comprehend the unexpected proposal. But a second later, he suddenly began to take off his clothes, which completely disturbed the peace of the room. The princess looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding why he was getting rid of his clothes so quickly. Embarrassment made her look away, and she sharply made it clear that such thoughts about her were deeply mistaken. Phoenix, with a surprisingly innocent expression on his face, only wanted to show the traces of what his former patron had left on him. The princess came closer, looking at the traces of pain and shock, and carefully asked if he had really been in pain. Phoenix revealed that his sponsor was a viscount who despised magic and wanted to have a submissive wizard servant. Most mages came from noble families and would never submit to such a will, but he was the only commoner among them. The viscount promised to pay for his education, but whenever the young man used magic, he would punish him severely. Phoenix touched his chest and quietly wondered if his new patroness would treat him the same way. The princess froze for a moment, struck by the pain and disbelief hidden in his question. She understood that the young man desperately wanted to trust, but past wounds did not allow him to take this step. In her eyes, he resembled a hungry stray cat who longed for warmth but was afraid to approach an outstretched hand. Realizing this, Martina decided to act cautiously, as if luring a wary animal. With a gentle smile, she proposed a deal, promising to pay for a whole year of his education for each discovery he made. She then tasked him with creating a portable magical heat source. Phoenix froze in surprise, as he didn't understand how she knew about his secret research. He actually worked on this project, but due to a lack of materials, he was forced to abandon it. Martina calmly noted that the coming winter would be harsh, and many villagers would have a hard time. As the princess of the empire, she wished for her people to face the cold with warmth, and asked if he could continue to work for that. Phoenix stood motionless, stunned by her words, then perked up and began excitedly asking one question after another. The princess proudly raised her chin and reminded everyone that she was considered the most famous villain in the empire, which meant that nothing was impossible for her. The young man suddenly laughed, remembering that the teachers considered him the worst student in the entire tower. But with a sincere smile, he asked permission to stay close and serve her. He then approached the princess and bowed respectfully, recalling the ancient gesture of loyalty. He explained that kissing the back of the hand has long been considered a sign of devotion and respect. A little embarrassed, he cautiously asked if he was allowed to make such a gesture. Martina was momentarily taken aback, noticing how much he resembled a wary but trusting kitten. She wondered if she could get his oath of allegiance much faster than she had expected. And the next moment, the young man respectfully touched her hand with his lips, confirming his choice. Martina saw in him the strength of a pillar of nations, but she understood that his loyalty to her was still in doubt, causing anxiety in her heart. She wondered whether his recent sincerity was genuine or merely a clever mask of deception, carefully concealing his motives. The princess studied him closely, wondering if the future archimandrite could be nothing more than a brilliant liar hiding his true intentions. He sheepishly inquired about the possibility of requesting research materials on her behalf, wavering between hope and fear. A moment later, a categorical refusal was heard from Lian, who lifted the wizard up like a stray cat, demonstrating his authority. Martina was taken aback and asked Phoenix why he had only arrived now when she had expected him to appear at the hotel earlier. Leon didn't answer the questions, only stating that the wizard was dangerous, causing everyone to tense up. He instantly drew his sword and warned that any approach to the Phoenix could end in danger, intending to receive an immediate response. Phoenix instantly cast magic, striking everyone present with his unexpected power, despite his status as a student. Martina froze in surprise, not understanding how an ordinary student could demonstrate such abilities that even the professor had not noticed. Looking at the young people, she wondered if this was an innate connection between the true pillars of nations. At the same time, she doubted whether this was not a manifestation of the simple instinct of caution of powerful predators. Leon shouted sharply that if she did not decide, he would eliminate the wizard himself, demonstrating his ruthlessness. Without thinking, he pounced on Phoenix, but he deftly dodged, demonstrating incredible reflexes. Martina sternly demanded that they lay down their arms, restoring order and control over the situation. The young people stopped in bewilderment, not expecting such a firm command. She recalled that both had sworn an oath of allegiance to her, becoming her vassals, and without her permission, they were forbidden to act independently. Phoenix apologized, explaining that he was scared and acted impulsively out of fear for himself. Martina came closer and promised to discuss his sponsorship with the professor, showing support and trust. While the Ksazgis were chatting pleasantly, the mercenary watched with hidden anger, clearly dissatisfied with the princess's attention to the student. The princess turned and met Lian's gaze, noticing his irritation and internal struggle. Martina also saw that he looked at her with sadness, as if he was apologizing for what he had done. She gathered her courage and decided that he should wait for her with the carriage until she returned, establishing order. The young wizard, leaving, made a face, glancing at the mercenary, showing slight coquetry. Lian held back his anger, but inner anger and worry for the princess boiled inside him. He was angry at himself for his impulsiveness, realizing that her anger was caused by his hasty actions. Lian remained puzzled and irritated, eager to eliminate any threat near the princess. He was shocked by his own madness from the moment he swore allegiance to her, not trusting his emotions. He was confused by the fact that the princess appeared again and again in his dreams, but in a slightly changed form, evoking new feelings. Lian tried to figure out if the short-haired princess from his dreams was really real. He was tormented by questions about why his chest hurt every time he moved away from her, and why the pain only subsided during battle. To distract himself, he took on even more missions, drowning in work and responsibility. Lian knew the princess was nearby, but he still wondered how he could pretend to be a normal person amidst his responsibilities. After some time, the princess returned, delighted to meet the future legendary magician, but knowing that the kiss of fidelity would come later. She soon noticed the mercenary in front of her and asked if he had calmed down after the last scene. Martina understood that even after the oath, the blood of the imperial family flowed through him, and he still remained a prince, demanding respect for his status. At that very moment, the young man grabbed her hand, pulled her towards him, and made it clear that his title had nothing to do with it, only his desire to be near her. Lian watched the princess intently, knowing internally that his body and thoughts now belonged to her as a sign of devotion. Martina was perplexed, watching the young man, not understanding the strangeness of his request and feeling a slight chill of anxiety. She saw his frustration and realized that there was little choice, so she noted that she didn't have a pen at hand and would have to use lipstick. Lian realized with a heavy sadness that this wouldn't work, because the lipstick mark would disappear too quickly, leaving only emptiness. He was afraid that in that case he would lose contact with the princess, and Martina worriedly wondered if he was okay at all. The young man approached and showed that even if he became a monster and forgot everything, the mark would still lead him to her. Martina cried out in pain and amazement, demanding to be released, amazed by his determination and willpower. A moment later, he realized his actions and froze in shock, amazed that he had hurt her with his own hands. Clenching his fists, he quietly and timidly asked for forgiveness, realizing his recklessness and the strength of the emotions that overwhelmed him. He then repeated his apology, acknowledging his loss of control. But the princess had already pushed him away, maintaining her distance and confidence. Martina watched him closely, wondering if he was trying to drown out his inner pain in this way. After picking a rose, she came closer and carefully asked where exactly he wanted her to write her name, her heart beating faster. Lian pulled back the collar of his shirt, exposing his chest, and quietly pointed out the place where the princess should leave her mark with a rose. The princess sighed heavily, gathering her courage. But a moment later, she came closer to him to carefully trace the lines of her name on his chest with the tip of the rose. Lian gritted his teeth with dignity, watching her movements, remaining calm and firm, not distracted by anything. She wrote the name slowly as he stood there obediently, looking at her as if trusting her with all his strength and fragility at once. A moment later, she wondered why he didn't scream, amazed at his patience and fortitude in the face of pain. After throwing away the rose, he explained that he deserved it, but she should not have to endure it in defense of her own dignity and independence. Lian licked the blood from her hands, swearing that as long as he breathed, he would not allow her to get hurt again, showing care and tenderness at the same time. At that moment, the princess saw a notification. He was already completely faithful to her, and each subsequent kiss would only give half the energy. Martina was amazed, not understanding why the energy was decreasing, but realized that it was done to awaken many pillars. She presented him with a personal invitation to the palace with a smile, allowing him to come whenever he wanted, as if trusting him with her soul. He wondered if it was possible to see her only once, and the princess explained that she was looking for a faithful knight, not a blind fanatic or a madman. She promised that if he behaved well, he would receive more invitations, and said goodbye with a smile, leaving him completely delighted. Liane looked after her for a long time with a tender smile, touching the chest with the carved name, feeling an unusual, warm calm. The princess returned to the castle, realizing that the young man was crazy, but devoted to her with all his heart and soul at the same time. She remembered his gaze, full of a vow of fidelity, and she understood that his heart belonged to hers forever, without a drop of doubt. She had several invitations for him, but now she decided to restrain herself and not to completely indulge his desires and whims. She understood that Phoenix was cunning, and Liane was like a wild stray dog that could go wild at any moment, requiring caution. Martina wondered, puzzled, if all the pillars of the nation were so wild, because she only wanted to calmly raise and protect her daughter. The princess returned to the majestic imperial palace, her heart pounding wildly, sensing impending disaster. Miel rushed towards her through the hall, anxiety reflected in his every movement, hastening to report the illness of the sacred beast. The sudden news caught her off guard. Her eyes widened, her breathing quickened, her mind swung between fear and anxiety. The sacred beast's belly suddenly swelled, pain engulfing its entire body, even though it had only drunk milk, causing the princess to feel acute despair. Martina ran to her daughter, her heart clenched in terror, her hands shaking as she carefully tried to grasp the scale of the disaster. Lily, with tears on her cheeks, was breathing heavily, her small body shaking with pain, her eyes full of fear and helplessness piercing her mother. Martina looked closely at her daughter, checking to see if pressing on her stomach caused pain, and noticed that it was very bloated. Lily cried out in sharp pain, her small body cringing and her eyes filling with tears, reflecting fear and discomfort. Martina recoiled, confused, not understanding how to ease her daughter's suffering and restore her peace. She hugged Lily, holding her close, instilling confidence that she would find a way to take away the pain and protect her at any cost. The princess went away to discuss the situation, and Lily waited anxiously and impatiently for her speedy return. The young princess hurried to Miel, asking if her daughter had eaten anything unusual or come into contact with dangerous substances. Miel confirmed that Lily had only drunk milk that morning that he had tested, which was safe and magically purified. Martina questioned him about possible sources of threat, worried that her brother might send another mage to cause harm. With horror in her eyes, she asked many questions, trying to gather all the information about her daughter's condition. Miel grabbed her hand, calling for calm, raising his voice so that the princess could hear, and froze in a daze. She froze, not expecting such abruptness, but realized that Miel had examined everything that Lily had come into contact with. He reported that nothing suspicious was found, since Lily had been doing nothing but safe drawing all day. The princess did not know what to do, confused and numb in the face of the sudden alarm. She sighed heavily, knowing that she was within the safe walls of the imperial palace and still had the power to protect her daughter. Realizing her status, she realized that she could control the situation and protect Lily from any threat. Miel assured that the threat had already been neutralized, the culprit had been found, and the daughter was under the reliable protection of the princess. He added that the sacred beast is a magical creature that is not susceptible to human medicine, and after improvement, it will be taken to a magician. The princess realized that her panic was a natural reaction, and Miel noticed her fragility and tried to support her. He wanted to hug her, but stopped in time. And the princess was surprised to note his caution and care. Miel, with a gentle smile, assured that everything was fine. The anxiety was unnecessary, and the moment passed without harm. A moment later, the maid entered, bowing welcomingly. At the same time, she informed the princess of the empress's desire to see her daughter. Martina looked at him in surprise, not understanding the urgency of calling her mother right now. She addressed her subordinate attentively, entrusting him with the care of her daughter and the sending of a letter to the magic tower on her behalf. A moment later, she screamed, checking to see if Miel could hear her and understand the importance of the task. Miel reassured her, assuring her that he could sort everything out and would not allow Lily to come into danger. After the princess left, the young man carefully removed a hair from her clothes and tenderly kissed it as a symbol of attention and devotion. After some time, the princess came to the empress, greeted her, and asked if everything was all right with the emperor. The empress greeted her with a gentle smile, inviting her to come in and sit down next to her to discuss all the important issues in a calm atmosphere. In a past life, The princess was convicted of serious crimes and exiled to a harsh border, deprived of all rights and privileges. Before she was thrown out like a rat, her mother visited her in prison only once, despite her poor health. Even then, her mother's voice was quiet and trembling. Martina could not make out every word, but she heard one clearly and distinctly. The empress, with tears in her eyes, simply called out to her child, expressing love and regret in every whisper. Later, during her exile, the princess heard news about her mother that troubled her heart and soul at the same time. The men whispered that the empress had died, but this was not surprising. She had not recovered from her daughter's exile. The young princess felt unbearably sad because she realized that she was guilty for the death of her beloved mother. The empress sighed heavily, telling her daughter that they had not seen each other for a long time, and begged her not to hate her, leaving Martin in confusion. She explained that in the noble council she could not take the side of her daughter against her son, putting the interests of the empire above all else. Because of this, she could not afford to be prejudiced, and Martina coldly declared that she would not be offended by her mother and would not give in to her brother. At that very moment, the princess told her mother about her many affairs and her desire to leave, but the empress stopped her with a glance. She looked closely at her daughter, reminding her that they had been very close as children and wanted to restore that relationship. The empress said that her son was angry because of her disobedience and asked him not to oppose his brother for the sake of the family. She feared that further confrontation could harm her daughter, but Martina declared that she would stop her brother herself before he raised his hand. The empress froze, amazed by her daughter's audacity and the harshness of her words, not expecting such an answer. At that moment, she sighed heavily, admitting that she had not wanted to destroy their connection, and warned that the prince of a neighboring empire would arrive next month. Isabel informed her daughter that the prince intended to form an alliance through marriage, leaving Martin with anxiety and thoughts about the future. Martina looked at her mother in surprise, because she did not understand why a marriage between their warring empires was proposed. She knew that conflicts between the countries had lasted for centuries, and the inhabitants of both empires disliked each other. Liana's mother once married an emperor, but she and her husband were hated, and she died in suffering, leaving behind memories of her troubles. The princess understood that marriage to the prince was an inevitable outcome and wondered if they wanted her to be the next empress. The empress explained to her daughter that she had always put the interests of the empire above all else and did not want to hurt her intentionally. She reported that the prince came with a proposal of marriage, being noble and elegant, and it seemed like a good marriage. Martina objected, believing that the move would destroy the sacred beast's growth, depriving it of its native strength and protection. Looking at the empress, she declared that she would be a mother to her child and would not leave him under any pretext. The princess turned around and decided to go to her daughter without delay to make sure she was okay. The empress was taken aback, unable to object, and sighed heavily, realizing that she could not intervene. She began to cry, realizing that she could not change what was happening and that she could only watch. The empress was puzzled because it was hard for her to see quarrels between children. Madame solicitously suggested that the empress rest, assuring her that everything would be all right when she woke up. The princess approached her daughter and carefully asked how she was feeling. Lily sighed heavily and complained of pain. Martina reassured her daughter that the great wizard would soon come and cure her. Lily reached out to her mother, asking for a hug, because hugs took away the pain and gave warmth. The princess hugged Lily, promising that she would be there and support her in everything. Later, the young princess woke up holding the sacred beast in her arms and feeling its warmth and fragility. She turned around and saw her friend, who was carefully covering her, observing her condition. Martina asked the young man if he had sent the letter to the tower, because now all that remained was to wait for a response from Felix. Miziel reported that he had sent the fastest horse and that they should soon receive an answer from the magic tower. Linny entered the princess's room and informed her that the letter had been delivered to the magician, but she was taken aback by the contents of the message. Linny explained that the magician had to come with her, and the princess was surprised by such urgency. She also reported that the young man asked the princess to look out the window. Martina was puzzled, not understanding whether he really intended to enter the room through the window. A moment later, the princess was taken aback by the magnificent fireworks display in the night sky. Lily woke up from the sounds and, noticing the bright lights, was surprised and asked what happened. But seeing the beauty outside the window, Lily was completely immersed in admiration. Lily watched the patterns in the sky with joy, amazed by the beauty of the fireworks. The princess asked her daughter if she liked the sight, and Lily nodded with delight. She realized that the magician had created fireworks in the shape of animals, as she had requested in the letter. Lily looked at the images with pride, seeing herself and her dreams in them. Lily happily declared that when she grew up, she too would be able to fly and create miracles. The princess was happy to see her daughter energetic and felt relieved by what she saw. Meanwhile, the young man magically launched fireworks, creating a magnificent display in the sky. He sighed heavily, realizing that he was now completely obliged to please the princess and her desires. He knew that he had to try hard for the princess's sake to ensure that his research went smoothly and without obstacles. Later, he looked at the princess in surprise, not believing that in front of him was the child she was talking about. The princess held her daughter in her arms with a contented smile, enjoying the moment. Lily asked in surprise if he had created her image in the sky while admiring the fireworks. Phoenix confirmed that he had done so, adding that he had previously considered sacred beasts to be just a legend. Martina explained that her daughter was the product of concentrated magical power, which is why they asked to cure her. Phoenix was amazed, because he was an ordinary student of the tower and did not expect such responsibility. He asked if the princess really trusted him with such an important matter. Martina smiled and expressed confidence that he would surpass everyone and become the pinnacle of magic. The young man was amazed by her words and could hardly believe what he heard. He looked away, frozen, realizing that, besides him, for the first time she believed in his strength and capabilities. A moment later, he used magic, and Lily screamed in sharp pain, as if an invisible force had flared up inside her body. He looked at the girl with bewildered bewilderment, because he had never seen such magic before, and it did not at all resemble human magic. Then the young magician realized that Lily's body was not at all like that of a human or an animal, because only pure and powerful magic was seething within it. He explained that the pain arose because a small portion of someone else's magic remained in her body, unabsorbed and continuing to disturb her own power. Martina thought about the young mage's words for a moment, trying to comprehend what she had heard. But after a few moments, she clearly understood that it was about a second kiss of fidelity. Phoenix, with a slight smile, asked if the princess held her daughter in her arms almost all the time, rarely allowing her to walk. Martina was momentarily at a loss, as the magician's words were frighteningly accurate and left no room for doubt. Mael abruptly intervened in the conversation and reminded her that Lily's life in the palace was full of dangers, so she constantly needed protection. Phoenix looked darkly at the young man, and for a moment, a cold displeasure flashed in his gaze. The princess took a step back and made it clear that she was not seeking protection, as she was only concerned about her daughter's health and her magic. Phoenix calmly assured that he could help solve the problem, since he had already managed to discern the girl's magical pattern. With a confident smile, he remarked that there was no riddle he could not solve, and immediately called upon his magic. The young people were taken aback when the room suddenly burst into a blinding light and filled with a quiet hum of magical power. A moment later, Lily was already calmly looking at everyone around her, and a slight smile shone on her face, because the pain had disappeared without a trace. At that very moment, she joyfully flew up to her mother, her eyes shining with happiness, because the unpleasant sensations had finally subsided. Martina hugged her daughter with a relieved smile and decided that from now on she would walk with her every day and give her the warmth of her hugs. Lily looked at the young magician with a grateful smile and, full of sincere joy, called him her brother. Phoenix came closer and accepted this address with a soft smile, but wondered with curiosity what he should call her mother then. Winking at the princess with a playful smile, he decided that, given his age, he could very well address her as sister. Martina looked at the young magician with puzzlement, but remained silent, hiding her thoughts behind a calm and cold expression. Meanwhile, Miel looked at the wizard with barely concealed rage, because he managed to help the princess where he was powerless. Linny noticed her comrade's anxious and tense look, and immediately became wary. She approached them and calmly reminded them that it was already late, and Phoenix could not stay in the palace overnight and had to return to the mage's tower. After some time, the princess saw the young magician off and asked what reward he would like to receive for saving her daughter. Phoenix looked at Martina with embarrassment and carefully asked if she would allow him to call her sister in private. At that very moment, the young princess turned around and confidently walked towards the young magician, causing Phoenix to freeze for a moment, watching her approach in confusion. Phoenix was puzzled because she was coming closer and closer, and a slight smile played on her lips, as if his thoughts were transparent to her. The princess came very close and quietly whispered in his ear that she needed real results to further support his research. Then she gently touched his face and made it clear that he should not beat around the bush and hide his intentions. After this, Martina reminded him with a warm smile that it was time for him to go back and rest, and finally called him brother. The young magician froze in complete stupor and looked for a long time after the departing princess with bewilderment. When her figure disappeared from sight, he sighed heavily and sheepishly admitted that the princess had easily read his thoughts. Linny glanced at him sideways and briefly told him not to fall behind, continuing to walk forward. Then he hurried to catch up with her and, with a curious smile, asked what the princess liked and how she became her personal bodyguard. Linny responded with a soft, calm smile, as if she had been expecting this question for a long time and was ready to share the story. She said that the princess's personal security detail previously consisted of 4 people, and all of them, except her, were men with questionable intentions. Linny was seething with rage as she heard the young guards whispering condemnation of the princess, and unable to bear the venomous contempt any longer, she rushed into the fray. She fought alone against the others and was almost exhausted when suddenly, among the noise, she heard a familiar voice. Turning her head, Linny noticed the princess nearby with amazement and froze for a moment in surprise. Martina, with a cheerful smile, ordered her to clear the place of trash and promised that victory would make her her only personal bodyguard. Ever since Martina learned of her daughter's illness, she took Lily for a walk every day along the quiet paths of the palace garden. And soon little Lily charmed everyone around her, because even the strict guards, servants, and visiting nobles could not resist her smile. Now, in the eyes of the people turned towards the princess, there was almost no sign of the former fear and cold disgust. Martina understood that she would soon have to introduce her daughter to society, because she wanted all the people of the empire to know how dear this child was to her heart. Moreover, such a step would help to understand how many nobles supported her brother and how many of them would dare to take her side. Therefore, she decided to organize a large banquet in honor of her daughter's first month of life in the new world, and invite all the nobility of the capital there. At first glance, the nobility seemed to be a single entity, but in reality it had long since split into factions with their own interests and hidden ambitions. Given her previous reputation, Martina knew full well that few would dare to openly support her. So she ordered her secretary to prepare 3 types of invitations, and the first were white letters intended for all the nobles of the capital. These letters were only a first cautious step to test the mood of the nobility and their true intentions. Those who accept the invitation will most likely be people who want to win her favor or who have already changed their minds about her. Among those who approved the second letter were the prince's supporters, who, thanks to the support of her brother, dared to look up to her. But there were also people who simply weren't afraid of her threats, and it was for them that the third letter was written. In red, it was a bribe. Nobles who would accept a bribe could not be called honest people. These were the very people who were under her brother's control. They could be lured to your side and made into your spies. But those who refused the princess 3 times will turn out to be either loyal allies of the prince or people with unwavering views worthy of respect. After 3 rounds of invitations, the positions of all the nobles will be crystal clear to her. Her next task is to defeat them one by one. The young princess knew that besides the nobles, there was one more person to take care of. He personally delivered all her letters and visited dozens of houses in the last few days. A moment later, she entered her subordinate's room. Miel looked at the princess in surprise and asked how she ended up in the servants' quarters. Martina looked at him sadly and asked if she had told him to rest all day. She didn't understand why he continued to work despite the fever. Miel smiled and admitted that he wanted to quickly sort through the letters that might help, but she sternly stated that there was no need for that and that he should return to bed. A moment later, she was taken aback, as she was unable to move him from his place. Miel looked at the princess with a smile and declared that he was taller than her, and if she continued in the same spirit, she could harm herself. A moment later, he looked at her with embarrassment and said that she shouldn't be around. He could infect her. Then the princess touched his forehead and noticed that his condition had improved since the morning. She came closer and said that with a little rest, he would recover. Miel was very embarrassed by such closeness. At that moment, he sighed heavily, removed her hand from his face, and declared that she should not treat her servants like that. Martina asked in bewilderment if he really wanted her to observe court etiquette, since she was considered a villain. He sighed heavily and said that it was not about that at all. Miel told the princess with a gentle smile that if she was too kind to the servants, she might be misunderstood. The princess froze for a moment, expecting something like this, but immediately declared that he was her subordinate, and she would behave with him as she wanted. Miel looked away and said that he knew she was a good person, but he couldn't hold back any longer, so he asked her to leave. He said that she had more important things to do and she shouldn't waste her precious time on him. After some time, the young princess looked at the closed door in surprise, not believing that her own subordinate had thrown her out. She wondered if he was in a bad mood because he was sick, and with a sigh, she realized that she would send someone to bring him medicine later. A moment later, the young man went to bed, irritated by the illness. He could not restrain himself. He was confused and perplexed, as his head was splitting with thoughts that should not be there. He understood that he was only a subordinate and should not want more. Miel clutched the princess's handkerchief that she had marked him with, knowing that everything he did belonged to the princess. The only thing he possessed was hopeless melancholy. After some time, the princess arrived at the residence of the Chief Justice, where she was greeted. Lily asked who they were going to see, and the princess smiled, saying that they were going to see a stern old man, the most important judge in the country. He decides how many blows the offender deserves, and Lily was taken aback. She was very scared. The princess said, with a smile, that there was nothing to be afraid of. You just need to be yourself. The judge was not evil at all. The supreme judge was created to judge sins. He clearly distinguished between good and evil. In a past life, his hammer sentenced her to lifelong exile. She knew she wouldn't allow that to happen, and now he was the first among those invited. However, he was the one who rejected all 3 letters. After some time, the princess met the lord, and he bowed and expressed the honor of seeing her. Martina introduced her daughter to him. Lily looked at the man shyly and showed politeness. The lord expressed concern for the sacred beast, believing that it would be safer for it to remain in the palace under the protection of the imperial family. The princess assured him that she had taken enough guards to ensure that the conversation would proceed smoothly, which made the man sigh heavily. He understood that he could not convince the princess, so he decided to resign himself. The princess smiled and felt curious, wondering why the lord refused to come to the celebration of her sacred beast's month of life. He was worried about his health and did not want to spoil the banquet with his poor condition, which slightly worried the princess. Her desire to see him at the banquet was strong, for she hoped that the lord's blessing would help Lily grow up to be fair and unwavering. The lord felt grateful for her words, but doubted his own importance, which upset the princess. The room was stuffy because of the fireplace, and the princess decided to get some fresh air on the balcony, leaving her daughter in the safety of her weak immune system. The man was shocked by such determination, believing that it was unacceptable. Martina noted with a slight grin that it was impossible to refuse the princess such a small request, and the lord agreed with her. The young lady stepped out onto the terrace, feeling the light breeze on her face, and her complaint about her soul was just part of a pre-planned game. Martina understood that her daughter should be forbidden from reading popular novels so as not to carry past fears into the present. Memories of her past life came to life. Her brother almost sentenced her to hang, but the Chief Justice changed the jury's verdict. His words shocked the princess because they confirmed that she, even in captivity, carefully held the sacred beast, not wanting to harm it. The lord always despised her arrogance, but decided to protect her, which left the princess perplexed. Memories of exile surfaced as she passed a village where life was bustling with its usual bustle. She was taken aback when she heard the madame calling the children to eat, and the children insisting that the lord would not be angry with them because he loved them very much. The princess learned that the Chief Justice had established many orphanages and always helped children, showing care and concern. Despite his stern and severe appearance, the lord doted on children, and this amazed Lily. Lily felt determined to take action, following her mother's advice to be herself. Lily watched the man with interest, surprised that he did not understand her thoughts about love, although the promises were made sincerely. She hinted with a slight smile that in that case he should pat her on the head, because everyone she liked did something similar. Matthew was taken aback by the sight of the sacred beast raised by the princess. His kindness and straightforwardness confirmed the truth of the rumors about his close relationship with the princess. The man carefully extended his hand towards the sacred beast, showing respect and trust. Lily smiled, noting that he shouldn't be shy, since her mother always said that her head was the softest in the whole wide world. The man agreed with a gentle smile, acknowledging that his mother was absolutely right. He watched Lily tenderly for a moment. The princess watched the scene carefully, understanding the true purpose of her test. She knew it was nearly impossible to win an argument with the supreme judge, but his sympathy for the sacred beast could become a key element in her future plans. After some time, the princess made it clear to the lord that she was not going to back down and still hoped to see him at her reception. She glanced at her daughter with a gentle smile, hinting that it was time to say goodbye. Lily looked happily at the lord, dreaming of playing together again someday. The lord watched them closely and said goodbye with a warm smile, rejoicing at the sincere connection between mother and daughter, and hoping that it would continue in the future. At that moment, the maid noticed that the lord's clothes were covered with the soft fur of the sacred beast and hurried to carefully clean it. The lord calmly asked her to collect all the wool and roll it into a small ball, as if carefully preserving a rare memory. The maid realized with a slight smile that the lord was enchanted by the little girl. He only smiled quietly in response, without saying a word. After some time, the princess and her daughter returned to the majestic imperial palace. The maid respectfully greeted the princess and conveyed the will of the emperor and empress, who wished to see her at a family dinner. The princess thoughtfully asked whether the invitation concerned only her or whether her brother was also invited to the dinner. Madame explained that the emperor had described this evening as a rare and warm family dinner. A moment later, Martina handed her daughter over to her faithful knight and instructed him to put the baby to rest. The princess was puzzled by the invitation to dinner and did not understand why she had been called. She wondered whether it was connected with the prince's refusal or with her brother's new intrigue. She knew perfectly well that nothing good was to be expected, because her native palace had long since become a cold and merciless place for her. The emperor was a cold-blooded politician and, in order to support the southern nobles, he married the daughter of a noble family, her mother. They had never met before their wedding, and Isabel was a quiet and shy noblewoman. She hoped to find love in marriage, but received only cold indifference. So she decided to become the perfect empress to earn her husband's attention. She raised her children with strict discipline, and it was in those rare moments of severity that a real closeness arose between them. The prince noticed that his sister looked tired and could barely stand on her feet. He understood that in a little while she would fall asleep right there with her book. Mayfield then cautiously approached his mother and asked if she would allow him to take his sister for a short walk to the library. The empress smiled softly and allowed them to leave, reminding them that they needed to return as soon as possible, as there was still much work to do. After some time, the brother and sister quietly entered the spacious palace library. The princess looked at her brother with a slight smile, realizing that he simply did not want to read and therefore took her for a walk. She knew perfectly well that he had no intention of playing with her, but the prince nevertheless recognized her insight and agreed to entertain his sister. Mayfield, with a warm smile, suggested they play hide-and-seek among the tall bookshelves, and the young princess happily agreed. The library was their quiet refuge. The empress locked the children among the endless shelves, and so the prince often offered his sister games to dispel the lingering boredom. The game had simple rules. The hider left a note in a book and hid it on any shelf in the vast library. Finding it meant winning. One day the prince, with lazy curiosity, asked his sister if she had a question that had been bothering her for a long time. After much thought, Martina quietly asked why he was the one who ended up being her older brother. The prince was at first confused, thinking it was just a matter of birth order, but soon realized that his sister had meant something different by the question. The girl admitted that in the books, her older brothers were kind and caring, but she only got a caustic childhood companion. Mayfield sighed heavily and thought with annoyance that he, too, might not have been so lucky with his stubborn sister. Martina flushed with resentment and resolutely headed for the exit, but her brother hastened to stop her. He still wrote an answer to her question, put the note in a book, and hid it somewhere among the countless rows of dusty volumes. Martina knew that if she found the book before the end of the game, victory would finally be hers. The girl wandered for a long time between the high shelves, carefully sorting through the heavy books and peering at each cover. She wanted to defeat her brother at least once and prove that she was no weaker than him. And suddenly, among the endless sea of bindings, her gaze fell on the right book. She lay high, almost under the ceiling, as if teasing her with her inaccessibility. Martina stubbornly reached for it, confident that she could get the secret book herself. At this point, Mayfield approached and watched her efforts with quiet amusement. The girl blushed even more brightly, convinced that her brother had deliberately hidden the book too high. The prince hinted that she only had to ask, and he would help her win. Martina glared at him, feeling pride and irritation boiling inside her. He calmly suggested that his sister might simply give in, since as a brother he would not punish her. In the end, the game remained unfinished, hanging in the air along with their childhood grievance. Martina did not ask for help or admit defeat. Instead, she rushed to her mother and raised a storm of indignation over the broken rules. For the quarrel, they were punished and forced to rewrite a long book, sitting at a cold table. Since then, Martin has been haunted by a tormenting curiosity about the contents of that note, but the answer remains forever hidden between the pages of a forgotten book. After some time, she entered the dining room, where the imperial family was already waiting for her. The prince met her with a heavy and cold look. The emperor noticed that the ministers were talking about the changes in the princess's character and her unexpected gentleness. He was pleased to hear this, because the heir to the throne had to possess wisdom and nobility. Martina understood that she now had responsibility for the sacred beast and for her own reputation. The emperor praised his daughter and emphasized that he always believed in her abilities. The princess knew that the most important thing for him was the support of the nobility. If she succeeds in strengthening the power of the crown, he will treat her differently. In her past life, she despised many aristocrats and did not hide it. When she was slandered, none of them stood up to defend her. Even her mother became part of a cold political game designed to show the mercy of the throne. Their smiles were just masks put on for the sake of other people's interests. For the emperor, children were valuable only as long as they served the authorities. When the need disappeared, their fates became indifferent. Perhaps this is why a cold wall of alienation has grown between brother and sister. Soon the emperor informed his daughter that the prince of a neighboring empire would arrive the following week. He was surprised that she hadn't started preparing for the meeting yet. Rumors reached him that all her attention was occupied by the festival of the sacred beast. Martina calmly made it clear that she had no intention of getting married. The prince only laughed when he heard her decisive refusal. He reminded her that the union of the two empires could strengthen the shaky peace. He mockingly hinted that she was missing a rare opportunity. Martina thought coldly that her brother could have used such a chance himself. The emperor sighed heavily and noticed that the neighboring empire had 4 heirs. He assured his daughter that the fate of the sacred beast had already been decided. Then he called the empress, and she entered the hall. Martina froze, feeling a strange anxiety and a premonition of trouble. The empress announced the discovery of a spell capable of transforming sacred beasts into humans. For the entire empire, this was an unprecedented and almost miraculous event. She gently urged her daughter to stop being stubborn and accept the family's decision. But Martina felt only a cold shock, realizing that for the sake of politics, they were ready to use even her own daughter. The empress smiled softly and assured her daughter that they were obedient children. She promised to take care of them if the brother and sister faithfully served the emperor and their country. She also assured that she would treat them with the same warmth with which a loving grandmother looks at her own grandchildren. Then the empress announced the boy's name, Siegfried. It sounded proud and majestic, like the name of a hero of ancient legends. Martina experienced a cold shock when she noticed that the children did not react to what was happening, as if their will and mind were under someone else's control. She turned to her brother in alarm, trying to understand whether he had known in advance about their parents' plan. But meeting his gaze, the princess saw only a sour and dissatisfied expression on his face. Then Martina clearly understood that her parents had not let him in on their plans, And in her thoughts, there was already a possibility of turning this circumstance to her advantage. Martina quickly returned to her seat and calmly made it clear that since the Empress was taking control, all she could do was trust her decisions. With a gentle smile, she noted that such an event had happened for the first time in the history of the Empire, and therefore the transformation of sacred beasts into people could be made the property of the entire country. At that very moment, she gave her brother a secret sign, an old signal from childhood, when they had to protect those who were dear to them. In this family, no one was trustworthy, not even the Emperor himself. Martina waited for her brother's response, hoping he would understand her intentions. Mayfield responded with a slight grin, hinting that it would be interesting if the entire empire knew what had happened. He added ironically that otherwise his cunning sister might herself announce that her beast was the first to take human form. The Emperor smiled approvingly, noting that a similar thought had occurred to him himself. However, a moment later, he clarified that the announcement should take place only after his children had carried out everything as he saw fit. The Emperor looked at them coldly and reminded them that they were members of the imperial family, which meant that their lives, honor, and destiny belonged to the Empire. After some time, the dinner was over, and the brother and sister looked silently at their sacred animals. Martina could hardly contain her emotions as she looked at her own daughter. She carefully extended her hand towards the girl, but she didn't react in any way. It was especially painful to see her empty, glassy gaze, devoid of any feelings. The prince quietly remarked that black magic was probably used here, since for the Emperor, sacred beasts were merely an instrument of power. Martina turned sharply to her brother and demanded privacy, wanting to talk without strangers. After some time, they stood on the terrace, slowly sipping wine and enjoying the cool evening air. Martina looked closely at her brother and admitted that this day unexpectedly reminded her of their distant childhood. Mayfield noted that this happened rarely, since she almost never reminisced about the past with him. Martina smiled softly and hinted that he wouldn't have responded to her secret signal if he didn't want to talk. Mayfield asked with a mocking smile whether he was talking about the times when a father made his own children hostage to politics. Martina nodded quietly and noted that, back then, they were about the same age as the current sacred beasts. The prince noted that in those years, she was still just a child. Then the eastern nobles rebelled, and the empire was caught off guard. The emperor pretended to be conducting peace negotiations, although in fact, he was secretly gathering an army for a decisive blow. To weaken the rebels' vigilance, he sent his own children to them as hostages. Mayfield sighed heavily, remembering how they had been kept locked up in a damp stable for over a year. He remembered how one of the nobles, intoxicated by the imaginary victory, decided to take the princess by force. Then the young prince, defending his sister, grabbed a piece of a horseshoe and wounded the attacker, causing him to flee in fear. Martina reminded her brother with a slight smile that he rarely remembered his own awkward moments. After all, he had become seriously ill with malaria and was lying in the stable in the heat, almost never getting up from the straw. It was she who then became friends with the groom and begged for medicine for her brother. In those days, they hardly spoke, because every word only increased the excruciating hunger. Then, among the cold walls and the smell of hay, they were like two abandoned dogs, forgotten by their own home. Mayfield noted with a cold grin that after the victory, the emperor decided that his children had long since died among the rebels and no longer existed for him. Martina responded with a predatory smile, in which a shadow of malice flickered, because fate had decreed otherwise and allowed them both to survive. The prince narrowed his eyes and cautiously asked if she had come for help, wanting to save the sacred animals from the fate of being their father's hostages. Martina only smiled quietly, making it clear that her brother had understood her true intention perfectly well, even without words, and then he approached and curiously wanted to know the price of his help. The princess sighed heavily and admitted that he remained her only brother and the only person she could rely on. These words surprised Mayfield. He grabbed her chin sharply and pulled her closer, peering closely into his sister's face. He remarked with mocking gentleness that she was not such a bad sister after all, and there was an unexpected warm irony in his voice. Martina sighed wearily and demanded to know the price, because she needed to know what he wanted for his help. Then the prince, with a satisfied grin, demanded the territory of Kayland, the lands that were under the rule of the princess. Martina calmly agreed and explained that while she was busy negotiating the marriage alliance, her brother should free the sacred beasts as soon as possible. She promised that if he succeeded, the lands of Kaland would indeed pass into his hands. Mayfield grinned and assured her that he would do everything flawlessly. After which, with mocking triumph, he congratulated his sister on the fact that they had become a family again. Later, the princess returned to her chambers, fully aware that her brother could not be completely trusted, but now she only needed to distract him. Entering the room, she sighed heavily because she still hadn't decided what to do with the banquet she was planning to organize. However, as soon as she crossed the threshold, she froze in surprise. In front of her stood her childhood friend and secretary, looking extremely exhausted and shabby. Louise, in a trembling voice, reported that as soon as the sacred beast had been transferred to the chambers, the empress appeared and, without hesitation, took the princess's daughter with her. The empress brought a dozen guards with her, and no one could stop them in their desperate attempt to return the child. The young man was wounded. Miel bitterly admitted his guilt, having failed to protect the sacred beast. Martina looked at him coldly and asked everyone to leave them alone. Left alone, the princess approached her childhood friend and quietly asked how severe his pain was, carefully wanting to examine his wounds. Miel sighed heavily and, with noticeable excitement, reminded her that she was a princess and she should not have touched a man so carelessly. Martina calmly noted that there was nothing wrong with that, since she had already seen a man's body, which completely embarrassed him. Miel recoiled in confusion, as if burned by her words, since he had not expected to hear such frankness. He quickly pulled away and bitterly reminded her that he was unworthy of her attention, because he was just a servant who should remember his place. Martina sighed wearily and admitted that the imperial family had used unknown magic to turn her daughter into a human. She added with alarm that the child was now going to be used for the sake of a political marriage, like a soulless piece on a chessboard. At the same time, the princess admitted that in order to save her daughter, she had to unite with her brother. These words stunned Miel, because the thought that she would turn to her brother for help seemed almost unthinkable to him. He was overcome with rage, but most of all, he was angry not at the circumstances, but at his own powerlessness. In a fit of anger, Miel declared that it was precisely because of his uselessness that the princess was forced to seek help from a man she did not trust. Martina looked at him in confusion, not understanding why he was speaking such desperate and gloomy words. Miel painfully admitted that he had failed to stop the empress and protect Lily, which meant that the enemies had already found the princess's weakness and ruthlessly exploited it. He thought bitterly that the mercenary could have stopped the guards, the mage could have healed Lily, and he himself had been nothing but a helpless witness. In despair, Miel almost shouted out that as the princess's servant he had proven himself completely useless and unworthy of standing next to her. The princess understood that her assistant was drowning in despair, and so she sharply slapped him on the cheek, hoping to bring him back to his senses. The stunned Miel didn't have time to come to his senses before Martina reminded him that he had already dedicated his entire life to her, and she had never asked for more. The young man was at a loss, because deep down he was sure that he could have done much more for her. His soul was torn apart by rage, and most of all, he hated his own powerlessness when he saw the princess depressed and wounded. He admitted bitterly that she must be too upset, so the best he could do was leave her alone. Martina sighed heavily, but did not stop him and responded only with silence, full of hidden weariness. However, deep down, she knew that Miel had always been an invaluable support for her. It had been that way since those distant days of their childhood. As he passed by, Miel noticed that the princess looked gloomy and angry, as if a heavy shadow of recent events lay on her heart. He cautiously suggested that the prince was harassing her again, and then Martina angrily threw a pillow at him, not even wanting to hear her brother's name. Miel only smiled softly, as if he understood everything without words, and suggested that she calm down, promising to tell her one of his stories. The princess was genuinely delighted, because he knew countless stories and always remained by her side as a faithful ally. But deep down, Martina was painfully wondering why this man now seemed alien to her, as if the former Miel had disappeared. Meanwhile, the empress carefully watched the sacred animals, who were sleeping peacefully on a wide bed, like innocent children. A moment later, she quietly informed her husband that the babies were asleep and carefully asked if he would like to look at them. The emperor only sighed heavily, making it clear that such a spectacle did not arouse any interest in him at all. The empress was visibly upset, but nevertheless reminded them that this was a rare opportunity to see them, and quietly rejoiced that their children had finally stopped quarreling. However, the emperor sharply accused her of being the one who had raised them to be so unruly, and with cold fury asked her if she felt any shame. The empress tried to justify herself in confusion, assuring that everything that had happened was not at all her will. A moment later, the emperor wearily stated that he was too tired and demanded that she take proper care of the sacred beasts, as they were extremely important to the empire. He also coldly reminded his wife that she should not disgrace her own family. A few days later, Emperor Shixu's second son arrived at the palace with great ceremony, accompanied by a lavish caravan of gifts under the guise of a friendly visit. His name was Nosa, and he was Leon's second eldest brother. Martina looked closely at the young prince and immediately noticed that he was not at all like his brother. His outfit was too bright and pretentious, like a festive decoration, while Leon would never have allowed himself such ostentatious luxury. For a moment, the princess thought about Leon himself, because she had once given him an invitation to a meeting, but he never showed up. That same evening, the emperor held a lavish reception in honor of the guests, and it was there that Nosa unexpectedly invited the princess for a private conversation. Martina felt something strange about what was happening, because the prince did not raise the issue of marriage publicly, but preferred a secret meeting. However, the princess understood that this could play into her hands, because if he wanted to get closer first, the question of marriage had not yet been finally decided. Therefore, she responded to him with a welcoming and radiant smile, easily accepting his proposal. At this time, Mayfield watched his sister with a mocking glint in his eyes, as if he saw a hidden game. He noticed her circling around her supposed future husband with a dazzling smile. Later, the prince was about to leave and announced that he had purchased a country estate where he was staying temporarily and would be happy to receive her there. A moment later, he gallantly kissed her hand, assuring her that the thought of a new meeting filled his heart with sincere joy. Martina responded with only a cold, almost predatory smile, fully aware that before her was not a loyal pillar of the empire, but only a self-confident and narrow-minded prince. Louise beamed with joy as she showed the princess the bright outfits, claiming that the day was perfect for a date, and inquired about Martina's choice. The princess sighed and asked to choose something simpler and darker than the maid expected, who dreamed of seeing her shining. Martina explained that she didn't like dresses and wanted something simple but practical for meeting her fiancé. The girl considered the upcoming meeting, deciding to explore the weaknesses of her future husband, but without the opportunity to discuss plans with the secretary. She understood that no one would help her, not even her childhood friend, because after the quarrel, he avoided her. In her anger, she accidentally hit her little finger on the nightstand and screamed. However, she quickly calmed down, rejecting Louise's help and refusing the doctor. Martina later met the prince, who greeted her with a smile, but the princess remained cold and did not respond to the greeting. They moved to an underground auction, a place where powerful artifacts could be purchased, filled with mystery and excitement. The princess asked ironically if he had visited similar establishments in his homeland and heard that he was bored with public entertainment. He added that he prefers pleasure that is difficult to earn. This slightly irritated the princess, and she only frowned. He smiled, noting that most of the nobles preferred masks, while the common guests tried their luck at revealing their faces to the world. The princess noted his observation with a slight smile and realized that the evening promised to be interesting and pleasant. He carefully placed the mask on Martina, assuring her that she would have an unforgettable time with him. As he drew closer, he promised that the pleasure of the evening would be almost endless, and Martina felt a slight thrill of excitement. The girl reminded him that in his empire, the emperor did not approve of the entertainment of the nobility, and asked if he was afraid of his father's wrath. The prince sighed, assuring her that he would protect her, and as long as his feelings were sincere, there was no reason to worry. With barely restrained rage, he noted that his father was already old and should have passed away long ago. While tying the mask, he accidentally hurt her, and Martina expressed sharp irritation, and he hastened to apologize. Later, he offered to pay for her purchases at the auction, but the princess merely stated that she was going to the restroom and asked not to interfere. The prince said that he would wait for her in the first hall, leaving a small contact card so that she could find him. After a brief meeting, Martina became convinced of the prince's emptiness, realizing that he only wanted to use the marriage for his own status. She knew that the union would only temporarily strengthen relations between the states, and marriage to a talentless husband would turn her into a pawn. While she was lost in thought, her attention was drawn to a familiar figure in the hall, and she saw with bewilderment a young wizard. Martina instantly came up with a plan while looking at her friend. Martina decided that she would walk to the hall on her own, leaving her escort behind. The auction began instantly, and the man announced the first lot, causing the guests to place bids excitedly, the air filled with excitement and tension. The young wizard showed interest in the lot and hastily placed his bid, without having time to consider all the consequences. The other participants also joined in the game. The stakes were raised, creating a noisy and tense atmosphere around. The wizard was slightly confused and stopped, and the princess watched his actions with a smile and lively interest. She noted with a sly grin that in his place, it would be wiser not to raise the stakes for now and take a closer look at the opponents. He turned around abruptly and sternly declared that she should not interfere, surprised by the stranger's courage. Martina only laughed quietly, because he was always cold with strangers, and commoners revealed their faces to attract the attention of aristocrats. The wizard was amazed and embarrassed by her words, and the princess remarked with a smile that he was handsome and that many people might notice him. He thought for a moment, but then became embarrassed, realizing in her directness and wit. Phoenix, as if testing her intentions, asked if she had really chosen it, reminding her of its high cost. Martina couldn't help but laugh, struck by the absurdity of the situation and his claims to an expensive rarity. She asked curiously how high the price was, since she herself was only the daughter of a viscount and had little means. The young man sternly told her that she should keep quiet if she was not ready to play by the rules, adding that a cheap fool would suit her better. The princess continued asking indiscreet questions, causing him slight irritation and confusion. Soon the man decided to make his final bet, his gaze tense and excited. Phoenix was at a loss. The price had reached the limit of his savings, and he didn't know what to do next. At that moment, Martina unexpectedly helped him press the bell, raising the bet, which completely baffled the wizard. She raised his hand and solemnly announced the final amount, astonishing everyone present. The young man was stunned to see such a huge bet, and he quietly noted that it could not be cancelled now. The princess asked him what he would do if he lost the stone because of her, testing his patience and character. Phoenix sighed heavily, assuring that he would do nothing, since he had already behaved ungentlemanly before. He smiled, noting that even without winning, he would find another way to get the stone, causing surprise and respect in the princess. Martina was taken aback because she expected him to demand compensation, but he only remained calm and calculating. The host looked around the room, asking if everyone was ready to place bets, and an oppressive silence fell, filled with tension and anticipation. A moment later, the presenter announced that several stones had been sold, causing a slight commotion among those present. Phoenix was shocked. He realized that he had won the lot, but curiously asked his companion how she managed to achieve victory. The princess explained with a slight smile that the stone was popular among aristocrats, and she, having calculated its value, made an accurate bid. Thanks to the princess's cunning, they won several stones. None of the opponents were able to outbid her offer, which caused her quiet joy. With a slight grin, she asked Phoenix how he liked her little show, noting the ingenuity of the aristocrats. Phoenix, rejoicing at his success, pulled the princess towards him and tenderly kissed her on the cheek, showing sincere gratitude. He apologized for his harsh behavior, hinting that the kiss could be considered an apology and a sign of gratitude. Overjoyed, he exclaimed that thanks to the acquired stones, his magical research would advance, thanking the princess once again. The princess watched him with a slight smile, thinking that he was a true fan of magic and sincerely appreciated the help. She noted that despite the simplicity of his character, his presence lifted her spirits and gave her a feeling of lightness. Meanwhile, the prince, sitting in a separate box, was nervously wondering where the princess had disappeared to, realizing that she was extremely problematic and unpredictable. He was furious when he realized that if she had left the auction, he would have been informed by now. And her feelings about the political marriage did not interest him. The prince wanted to have fun, and at the same time was irritated because the princess was getting on his nerves, causing him to lose control. He asked his subordinate whether slaves would be put up for auction and received an affirmative answer with details about them. The prince gave the young man his reward and declared that he would take all the slaves, adding that he did not like noisy and unruly people. He coldly noted that some slaves would have to be punished, especially severely, hinting at the need to cut out their tongues so that they would not interfere. The princess wandered leisurely through the auction hall, sensing the strange atmosphere. The wizard had disappeared, leaving her alone among the flickering display cases. She noticed that his delay seemed suspicious, although he should have returned quickly after paying for the stones. At this time, the young man loudly demanded from the merchant why he refused to sell him precious stones, despite the presence of gold. The man explained with disdain that magical amber was a rarity of the highest rank, and it was unacceptable to sell it to a commoner. Phoenix became furious, realizing that such rules did not exist at the auction, and loudly accused the merchant of lying. The merchant was also angry because someone dared to challenge his authority and raise his voice against him. Suddenly, one of his subordinates slapped the wizard in the face, which only increased his anger and the tension in the hall. Phoenix froze when he noticed the princess who had recently been next to him among the guests and was surprised by her presence. He asked what she was doing in such a dangerous place, but the princess confidently declared that she would buy the stones instead of him. The merchant looked at the young lady mockingly, assuming that she was trying to pass herself off as an aristocrat. The princess sharply demanded that he take his words back and confirmed that she would be the one to pay for the jewels. Phoenix stood in front of her, shielding her with his body, firmly declaring that he would not allow threats to affect her. He grabbed her hand, and together they quickly left the hall, leaving behind a storm of surprised and tense glances. The princess carefully treated the young man's wound, wondering why he didn't just let her buy the stones, to which he replied that he had another plan to complete his research. Phoenix, with a slight smile, apologized to the lady for getting her handkerchief dirty, promising to wash it thoroughly before returning. Martina looked at him with a smile, struck by his care and quiet sweetness that showed itself even in small things. The wizard asked if her presence near him would cause gossip, and the princess assured him that she had come alone and everything would be fine. He came closer and asked with a little playfulness if he could indulge in a little mischief, to which she responded with bewilderment. At that moment, the phoenix showed off a magical flame and asked the princess to blow on it, causing her to express a mixture of surprise and admiration. It was the first time she had seen such a miracle of magic, but without hesitation, she did what he asked. And the flame came to life, blazing throughout the hall. With a cry and laughter, Phoenix noticed that they didn't want to sell him the stones, but he himself was almost unharmed, because the main thing is magic and the pleasure of the game. The wizard extended his hand to the princess, inviting her to dance among the flames, creating an atmosphere of incredible magic. While auction workers were rescuing the frightened aristocrats, he smiled and remarked that he would just like to take the stone and leave, enjoying the moment. The princess screamed as the flames approached her, feeling a tingling sensation of danger mixed with excitement. Phoenix asked with a smile if she was used to such artificial wonders, watching her reaction with curiosity. Martina was taken aback and admitted that this was the first time she had encountered such a magical flame, and fear was a completely natural reaction for her. The phoenix, with a slight smile, informed the princess that she could play with fire, because the magical flame was weightless, and its particles floated in the air. He explained that as soon as the flame senses the slightest vibrations in the air, it comes to life, creating the illusion of a real fire. The princess froze for a moment, amazed, for she had never seen such magic before. With a smile, she noticed that the magical particles, like little fireflies, were moving lively, filling the air with a wonderful glow. She thanked Phoenix with a satisfied smile for deciding to give her this amazing and unusual entertainment. The young wizard felt slightly embarrassed and watched the princess intently for a while, not daring to look away. He soon pulled away sheepishly and admitted that he needed her help in finding the gems. While the princess was playing with fire, Phoenix concentrated on his search, carefully examining every corner. He was slightly puzzled by how friendly she responded to his request, showing sweet concern. However, he soon drove away all extraneous thoughts, concentrating entirely on the task at hand and the search for the stones. Moments later, Phoenix finally discovered the magical stones hidden among the shadows and artifacts. Turning around, he looked at the princess and announced that they could now leave the hall. At that moment, he froze in surprise and could not take his eyes off the young lady. He noticed that something had upset her, and the first tears were shining in her eyes. Phoenix carefully approached and asked with concern if she was okay. Martina admitted with a sad smile that someone important to her was going through a difficult time, and she thought about how much joy this game would bring. To her regret, Phoenix did not want to hear about her concerns, immersed in his own thoughts. But for a moment it seemed to him that he had known this mysterious lady for a long time. Phoenix came closer and wondered how she could have ended up here, being the daughter of a viscount and an aristocrat. He desperately wished that they were just a mage from the common people and an ordinary girl, free from the shackles of the palace. The Phoenix, with a gentle smile, asked the princess not to cry, explaining that he could still perform many funny miracles, but her tears made him helpless. The princess asked with a slight smile why this affected him so much. The wizard looked away in embarrassment and admitted that no spell had ever touched him as much as her tears, and this remained a mystery to him. Suddenly, the young people were taken aback. The auction owner burst into the hall and announced that he had caught the thieves. The man was beside himself with rage and shouted that the masked woman was the wizard's accomplice. Phoenix stood in front of the princess, shielding her with his body, and firmly declared that no one would dare touch her because she was an aristocrat. He told his companion that he would detain the attackers and that she should flee. The princess inquired about his fate, but he only assured her that he could be beaten and that her reputation was more important to him. At that moment, the men screamed, trying to stop them from escaping, but Phoenix's determination was unwavering. The princess sighed heavily and simultaneously reached for her mask. Removing her disguise, she declared that she was the princess of the empire and angrily demanded to know how they dared to show her such disrespect. Everyone present looked at the princess with amazement, not believing that she could have ended up in such a place. At that very moment, the man sternly ordered his subordinates to immediately get out of the way and be silent. He was frightened, screaming that he saw a portrait of a princess with fiery red hair and gray eyes. Phoenix was taken aback and asked sheepishly why she was there, and the princess winked at him and said that she was just lucky. She then looked sternly at everyone in the room and declared that underground auctions were a serious crime, and that refusing to sell an item after a bid was fraud. She added that cutting off heads was not enough for such a crime, but she was precisely the one who needed information about underground deals, and with a grin asked if the man understood what was expected of him. The man timidly promised to fulfill her demands, and the princess instructed him to send the information to the palace along with the delivery of a new outfit. Martina knew she had to take advantage of the situation and take control of the auction. At that very moment, she was taken aback when the prince entered the hall with a grin, declaring that he was beside himself with excitement. Nosa, with a fierce grin, asked the princess if she had found herself a new lover. Phoenix was momentarily taken aback and froze in embarrassment when he was called the princess's lover, and Martina looked at the prince with cold hostility, not understanding why he had appeared. He came closer to the princess, wanting her to pay him extra for playing her lover. Martina accepted his offer with a smile, asking him to remain silent and play along with her, leaving the prince puzzled and not understanding what they were talking about. She added that Phoenix was a talented young man, which was why she kept him close, and asked with a smile if she could have several handsome lovers. At that very moment, she looked at the prince with a fierce grin and declared that he should understand her like no one else. The prince said with a smile that he supported her decision, noting that they were similar, and was confident that after the wedding, their relationship would only become stronger. Nosa came closer and asked if she wanted to go to the casino with him since the auction had not taken place. At the same moment, he added with restrained anger that 3 of us would be much more interesting. The princess looked at him with a predatory grin and agreed. A moment later, the young people came out into the street. The prince noticed that it was already dark and extended his hand so that she could safely get into the carriage. Martina thought for a moment. Anna had just deliberately caught him out, and he had not only confessed but had been proud of it. Now she wanted to cut off contact with him completely. At that very moment, Phoenix noticed that the prince was very kind. At the same time, he stood between them, blocking the princess from the prince. Phoenix looked at the prince with a grin and stated that the princess was already used to leaning on him, and it was unpleasant for her to touch the hands of other men. The prince noted with a grin that the princess truly had a devoted gentleman. As she boarded the carriage, the princess declared that she was surrounded only by people loyal to her, and the prince had better get used to it right away. A moment later, Martina asked Phoenix why he'd intervened. He replied that she wouldn't brag about her lovers to someone she was truly interested in. He noted that it seemed like she was being forced into an unwanted marriage, and immediately added that the prince was simply a runt, and it would be better if she did not get involved with him. But then he was taken aback and wondered what he had even said. He was puzzled because she looked so vulnerable that he had even forgotten to ask for money for the research. At that very moment, Phoenix said with a smile that since he had played well, he could count on an increased bonus. Martina smiled and asked if he really wanted a raise for just one scene, saying that she didn't throw money around so easily. But at that very moment, the princess froze when the young man approached her too close. Phoenix looked at her intently and asked sheepishly if that wasn't enough. Martina stood still for a moment, admiring his beauty. He looked at her with embarrassment and asked if it was not customary to close one's eyes at such moments. She sighed, feeling his presence ease her anxiety, and wondered if it was just his magic. The young man froze for a moment, wondering why she didn't pull away, knowing that he could have kissed her that way. He wanted to say something, but the princess suddenly staggered, and alarm flashed in her gaze, as if the world around her had instantly become dangerous. Phoenix stood frozen in place, confused and stunned, trying to figure out what exactly had caused her sudden tension and inner fear. The princess called out to him softly, her voice filled with worry, making Phoenix's heart beat faster as he tried to understand what was happening. Her eyes darted to the window, and he noticed fear. The escorts had disappeared, and the carriage was surrounded by people ready to carry out any order of the prince. Phoenix thought, sensing difficulties. They would not get to the casino along this road, because he had already seen similar traps and knew how dangerous they were. He cautiously suggested they escape, knowing it would be difficult to fight alone, but deep down he was willing to risk it for her safety. The princess felt a deep sadness at the impossibility of making him a hero, realizing that running away would only worsen future problems, and his life was more precious than anything. She handed over the key and told him about a safe in the vault of the magic tower, where she hid something valuable for him, asking him to leave so that the reward would help him continue his research. At this time, the young wizard returned to the prince, confidently declaring that all the secrets were now revealed, and he was ready to tell the truth, on which much depended. He revealed that the emperor had used a forbidden potion to turn sacred beasts into humans, and that this potion had been created by the tower's elder mages many years ago. Mages had been studying it for 30 years, but the potion had a terrible side effect. The life of the sacred beast was shortened after transformation, making the experiment dangerous. The prince fell into deep thought, realizing that many years ago his father had not yet worn the crown, and the study of forbidden secrets began long before his reign. The young wizard confidently announced that he had planted people in the empress's entourage, causing the prince to express a mixture of surprise and gratitude, after which he let him go. Mayfield remained perplexed, because his mother strictly forbade him to meet with sacred animals, and he only occasionally looked through the crack in the door. He noticed that the girl resembled his sister, and secretly hoped that she would grow up to be just as obedient, causing a quiet anxiety in his heart. From an early age, Phoenix wondered whether genius was truly doomed to loneliness, and thoughts about the fate of the gifted always tormented him. But the reflections were short-lived. A friend ran up and said that the stove in the house had broken down, and only bread was left, reminding him of the need to solve pressing problems. He handed over his favorite candy and carefully asked Phoenix if he could handle the broken stove, hoping for his skillful hands. Phoenix reached for the treat with a satisfied smile, feeling the warmth of attention, and promised that he would fix everything without delay. At that very moment, the madam approached her son, but did not raise her voice, because he was distracting the boy by offering him some unnecessary object as if in a game. She sighed heavily and respectfully asked the great wizard to understand that such a trifle was not at all worthy of his attention, but she could not remain aloof. Phoenix felt that the villagers treated him with genuine respect and reverence, considering him their talisman, but inside he felt empty. Despite the worship and respect, the thought settled in his heart. True genius is always alone, and this thought became his life motto. Studying was always done alone, without friends or mentors, but Phoenix perceived this as an inevitability that strengthened his spirit and mind. Over the years, he became accustomed to going through life alone, realizing that loneliness is his companion, and inner peace and knowledge are his only true friends. To his regret, Phoenix walked forward in complete solitude, getting used to a life where no one would lend a helping hand and no one would share his worries. He was used to handling everything on his own, and because of this, the rich students considered him a nuisance, not noticing his talent and inner strength. Great magic became his only true friend, who is always there and will never betray him, like a light in the darkness of his lonely soul. He dealt with all the hardships of life on his own, not allowing fear or difficulties to lead him astray, persistently moving towards his goal. He saw ridicule and bullying, endured until the very end, holding back his anger and pain so as not to show his weakness to anyone around him. He didn't care that he would be left alone, because Phoenix had long since realized that caring for others was not part of his life's path and would not save him. Inside, he felt empty from the admiration and adoration of others, realizing that only his own strength and magic could be his support. He realized that the princess was right when she called him selfish and cunning, and at the same time he knew that for her he was not just a man, but a young genius, the only one who truly saw him. Phoenix sighed heavily, realizing that he was like an open book to the princess, and in this transparent knowledge about him, there was a slight boredom. The princess, without turning around, quietly asked him to disappear, noting that the forest would be a safe shelter for him and a chance to hide from danger. Martina confidently assured her companion that the prince would only care for her, and no one would dare harm her, maintaining peace between the countries. He realized that she was right, and with a slight smile, he thanked her for the magic stones. Realizing that she always came to his aid in difficult times, the princess warned him to be careful because she would not be in the capital for the near future, and he would be left alone, without the ability to count on her support. He felt that the princess always kept a calm face, as if she had everything under control. But Phoenix knew that she had no idea that he would leave without hesitation. Inside him, a desire burned to return to the magical tower and find the gift she had left behind, like a small beacon beckoning with hope. He intended to complete his research alone, overcoming obstacles step by step and reaching heights of magic that others could only dream of. All this moved him because he was a genius, and loneliness became his inevitable companion, forming a strength and determination incomprehensible to ordinary people. He remained perplexed, not understanding what was hidden behind her expression at the moment of farewell, and this feeling tormented him more than any spells. Rage flared inside Phoenix because he couldn't just leave her alone, without help, without protection, despite the risk and the fear that his powers were insufficient. Thanks to her, he felt determined, as if loneliness had become a test for him that he was ready to overcome, and his heart was drawn to her irresistibly. He realized that the princess was the only one for him, and the desire to be near her filled his mind and soul, creating an internal storm. The next morning, Phoenix looked at his comrades with fury, wondering how there had been no news of the princess until now, as if fate itself was mocking him. They reported that they had searched the entire capital, but not a single trace led to the princess. No one knew when and with whom she left the auction, and even the prince's men were silent. Miel noted with alarm that it was necessary to examine every corner of the city, realizing that the prince's calm was a bad sign, foreshadowing hidden danger. Louise looked at the lord with concern, reminding him that he had not slept all night and that his poor health required rest. Otherwise, the consequences could be unpredictable. Linny sternly ordered the maid to leave the lord alone, because when it came to the princess, he was ready to sacrifice his own life, and the young man quietly thanked her for these words. At that very moment, the wizard burst into the room, filled with confidence, and declared that he knew where the princess was now. Linny was taken aback, her eyes widening in surprise, as she had not expected such a sudden guest to appear. The young man immediately attacked the wizard, demanding to know the location of the princess and make sure that she was okay. but Phoenix said that she had been kidnapped by the prince, and he had already calculated their coordinates using magic. Miel looked at Phoenix with fury, not believing his ears, asking if he really allowed the prince to take the princess while he was right next to her. Phoenix, clenching his fists in anger, sternly addressed the secretary, demanding that he be more careful with his expressions, while seeing how he disliked all the men who had ever been near the princess. Phoenix declared with determination that only he knew the exact location of the princess, and now everyone must pull themselves together and act calmly. Meanwhile, the prince, with a sly grin on his face, carrying the princess in his arms, mockingly reminded her that her lover had killed many of his people. He added with a sly threat that he had to put the princess to sleep so that no one could take her away, and this gave his image a frightening confidence. The next morning, the princess opened her eyes in an unfamiliar environment and immediately realized that she had been kidnapped by the prince. Her heart filled with rage. She rushed to the door, full of anger and distrust, but when she opened it, she was faced with the prince's grin, as if everything that was happening was part of his game. The prince assessed how she had slept with curious playfulness, while his gaze lingered on the dress that emphasized all the smooth lines of her figure. Martina couldn't take it anymore and hit him in the face with all her strength, spilling out all her pent-up anger and indignation on this impudent kidnapper. Her thoughts whirled, and she asked with cold curiosity who dared to decide for her, noticing that the outfit was clearly the prince's doing. At that moment, the prince, with an icy grin, finally realized what his subjects had meant when they called her a poisonous, blood-red spider, and this thought surprised him slightly. He reminded her that her father had given him full rights, and it sounded like a cold sentence. The princess rushed away, tormented by the thought that her father had really sold her. Coming closer, he noted with a sardonic grin that although she belonged to the Blue Bloods, in the world of politics, she was just a valuable commodity that could be bought and sold. At that moment, he pulled a maid towards her and with cold seriousness declared that this was one of the lots he had bought to strengthen his power, as if reminding her of her complete dependence. She angrily declared that even if her father had been involved in the deal, no one had the right to decide her fate, and in the event of betrayal, she was ready to commit suicide. The prince sighed heavily, realizing how repugnant she was to the idea of marrying him, and that she would prefer death to submitting to someone else's will. The princess, with a cold smile, challenged him, saying that he must try to understand her himself, and only then would he be able to comprehend the whole truth. The prince held back his rage at the insolent words, but remained silent, hiding the anger that was raging inside him like a smoldering volcano. At that very moment, he threw the maid at the princess's feet, declaring that she would serve her, and at the same time demanded her consent to the marriage union, as if testing her resolve. Moments later, the princess was left alone with her thoughts, struggling with anxiety, anger, and the feeling of her own power in such a dangerous game. Now, thinking about everything that had happened, she realized that the prince had skillfully planned her invitation to the auction so that the kidnapping would go off without a hitch. The maid timidly reached out to the princess, and at that moment, Martina realized that she could not speak, which only increased her anxiety. She saw the girl's mouth without a tongue and was frozen with horror, unable to understand how such cruelty could have happened. But the princess soon realized that the prince himself was behind this, cunningly planning every detail of the event. At that very moment, the maid gestured towards the table, inviting the princess to follow her and reveal the secret. Martina realized that the girl wanted to say something, but guessed that she couldn't write and could only express her thoughts on paper. Upon seeing the drawing, she instantly realized that it was the maids who had dressed her, carefully and discreetly, concealing the true danger of the situation. Martina thanked the girl with a quiet smile, feeling how this simple action slightly calmed her anxiety and restored her trust. The young lady, meeting the princess's gaze, could not bear the tension and burst into tears, allowing her emotions to break out. Martina was shocked to see that even strangers expressed compassion despite the fact that her own father had sold her out as an outsider. She began to believe that the terrible family couldn't make her life any worse, and this gave a faint spark of hope. A few days later, the princess found herself again next to the prince, but now with the awareness of his power and cunning. Without finishing her breakfast, she tried to leave as quickly as possible, trying to hide her anxiety and maintain the appearance of independence. The prince, with a slight smile, noticed that the princess had eaten almost nothing, and jokingly said that she needed strength so that she could be offended at him. Martina sarcastically noted that the food was tasteless, and her gaze showed irritation and slight fatigue from all the intrigues around her. The prince sighed heavily, recognizing the strangeness of the situation, as all the dishes had been prepared exactly according to her preferences, and yet her reaction still surprised him. A moment later, he announced that a guest would soon arrive, asking if the princess wanted to meet him, as if testing her mood. The princess categorically refused, declaring that any communication with the guest only spoiled her mood, and hurried to her room, wanting privacy. A moment later, she was resting in her room, trying to collect her thoughts and figure out how to deal with her own emotions. At the same time, the princess was puzzled, because she looked around every corner but did not find a single chance of escape, feeling that the situation was vicious circle. Martina realized that they were on the outskirts of the capital, where there were almost no neighboring houses, and the windows offered a view of numerous guards outside. Inside the mansion, slaves were everywhere, so terrified that it was scary to even breathe, and the prince kept them under an iron rule. The prince watched Martina closely as she watched him, but he only said with a grin and a silent look that her future place was among her subordinates. She considered pretending to agree to the marriage in order to run away later, but she knew that such a plan was doomed to failure and would not bring freedom. A moment later, the princess was taken aback when she heard several voices and instantly realized that the prince's guest had arrived, causing her heart to stop. She froze, listening to the conversation of the young people, trying to catch even the slightest meaning of words that could reveal the situation. But at that very moment, she was even more taken aback when she heard a familiar voice, Leanne's voice, which instantly awakened in her both anxiety and relief at the same time. The princess rushed towards them, reproaching herself for having forgotten that they were brothers, and now she felt a mixture of fear, guilt, and hope. The young man heard a crash, raised his head, and saw Martina in front of him. Martina froze in place, unable to believe her eyes. Leanne introduced the princess with a joyful smile and informed her that the emperor had already given permission for the marriage, making her the official bride. And this filled her with hope. However, Leanne looked at the princess with cold fury, without saying a word. And this look made her heart beat faster, reminding her of the tension of the moment. Nosa, with a gentle smile, asked the princess if she was finally in the mood to come down, since she usually only accepted him when he came to her himself. Martina understood that she needed the help of a mercenary, but she also knew that Nosa must not guess that they knew each other, otherwise her chance of escape would disappear. The princess did not deign to answer the young man, and only hastily took her place, trying to hide her anxiety and maintain an outward calm. She then casually remarked that she had heard the prince call the guest his brother, and had therefore decided to meet someone from his family. The prince grinned and asked with mild interest if she had decided to get to know him better, after which he invited his brother to sit down so that he would not ignore his bride. Leanne looked at the princess with cold fury, mentally wondering if she had really intended to marry someone other than the father of her child, and how many more secrets she was hiding. Martina was puzzled by this heavy look and did not understand its reason. She only hoped that he would not lose his mind, as he once did, because he remained her last hope. Leanne guessed that the princess was deliberately hiding their acquaintance, so he decided to remain calm and just watch carefully, waiting for her next move. At that very moment, he sat down next to them, trying to get a closer look at what was happening and find an opportunity for conversation. Then Leon calmly announced that he had received an order from an aristocrat. At first, he did not recognize him, but as soon as he uncovered his face, the customer was instantly speechless. Then he learned that in recent years, the nobility of the empire had split into warring factions, each of which had seized its own lands and unleashed a merciless war. Realizing the scale of the turmoil, he refused the order and hurried to the palace, where fate brought him together with his father among the dark corridors of power. Leanne reported that his father was catastrophically short of troops, and without the support of his sons, it would be impossible to maintain order in the empire torn apart by strife. He looked with bitterness at the aging ruler, who, without hiding his tears, begged for help, as if despair had finally broken his pride. Lean admitted to his brother that he had already passed on this news to the other brothers, and then calmly asked when he planned to return to his homeland. The prince merely smiled in response, noting that his brother had been absent for too long and was therefore worrying in vain, since this state of affairs in the empire had long since become commonplace. Martina knew that in his past life, Lian had returned to his homeland around this time and suppressed a rebellion, which earned him fame and made him a hero throughout the empire. The calm that emanated from him now reminded her of the god of war from her past memories, and she understood that their destinies had crossed once before. Lian calmly told his brother that they should return to the empire because their father needed them, and at the same time, he addressed the prince as a younger brother, asking for help. The princess watched the prince intently, waiting for his answer and trying to catch the slightest change in his facial expression. Nosa looked at Lian with a cheeky grin and coldly asked how he dared to speak to him like that, reminding him that his mother was the daughter of a grand duke, while Lian's mother had no position. He coldly, disdainfully declared that Lian's mother was nothing but a shameless woman who had run away with another man, and these cruel words instantly caused Lian's heart to flare up with rage. Unable to bear such a humiliating insult, Lian immediately used force on his brother, making it clear that his mother's honor could not be tarnished. With anger burning in his eyes, he looked at the prince and made it clear that he had no right whatsoever to utter such insults. Nosa cried out furiously that their father had turned his back on the aristocracy to marry a worthless foreigner, and it was because of this decision that the empire had plunged into civil war. Then, with a mocking grin, he asked if the other brothers had also refused to help, declaring that their empire had long been in ruins and the youngest could save his father alone. Lian angrily asked if this was why the prince had decided to marry, since such a union would ensure his safety, despite his complete lack of feelings for the princess. Martina understood that in the midst of this conflict, her newly made fiancé would not even notice her, and therefore decided to take advantage of the suddenly appeared opportunity. At that very moment, Martina approached her friend and barely audibly whispered in his ear a request to save her, putting all her hope into these words. Lian was taken aback for a moment as he had not expected such an address at all, and the sudden request made him freeze in confusion. At that very moment, the prince cried out sharply and called for the guards, deciding to take advantage of the situation and get rid of his own brother. A moment later, armed guards burst into the room and formed a tight ring around the young mercenary, ready to seize him at any second. Lian kept his gaze fixed on the young princess, as if trying to understand the hidden meaning of her unexpected request. Martina held her breath, not knowing what to do next, and then calmly declared that she would accompany the young man herself, since he was, after all, her fiancé's brother. She sighed heavily and calmly remarked that there was no need for relatives to quarrel with each other, but Nosa sternly made it clear that she was only allowed to accompany his brother to the door. A moment later, the princess slowly accompanied her acquaintance down the corridor, trying to remain calm and not reveal her true thoughts. She looked at him with a soft smile and expressed the hope that this meeting had not ruined his day, after which she offered his hand and said goodbye. Lian was puzzled by what was happening and did not understand her behavior. Just recently, she had asked him to save her, and now she seemed to be supporting his brother. He could not figure out her intentions, but he was sure of one thing. His feelings remained the same, and he wanted to meet her again. Martina understood that even if Nosa suspected something, she could not miss the opportunity to kiss Lian, because this was the only way she could find out what had happened to her daughter. Meanwhile, the prince and empress watched the children closely, never taking their anxious glances off them. The empress was very worried and kept wondering whether the prepared drink would be able to restore their health. Her anxiety only increased, because before the children were simply silent and hardly spoke, and in recent days this was accompanied by trembling and cold sweat. The prince was confident that his people had completed their task and calmly stated that he was going to saturate them with magical energy. He recalled that the children were actually magical creatures who were once forcibly turned into humans. A moment later, he used his power and snapped his fingers, commanding his son to wake up. A few seconds passed, and the boy finally came to his senses, blinking and looking around as if trying to remember where he was. Siegfried glanced casually at the prince, asking why he had been awakened, and the prince was surprised to notice the boy's striking resemblance to himself. The boy sighed heavily, declaring that he was very sleepy, as if everything around him was too noisy and alien. The Empress was delighted by such peace and immediately asked her son to heal the girl, but the prince explained that his powers were powerless here. Mayfield reported that the wizard who examined the girl noted strange magic within her, and no force could cope with it. He asked the mother to leave them alone, stating that he did not intend to steal the children and openly confront the father, avoiding unnecessary violence. Siegfried looked closely at the young lady, wondering who was sitting next to him, and clarified that it was his younger sister who had hatched with him. The boy was surprised, asking if younger sisters came from different eggs, but the prince explained that his sister was a person with the same blood as him. Soon the young lady came to her senses, looked around and asked in bewilderment where she was and who these people were around her. She turned her attention to the prince and screamed, bursting into tears, because in front of her stood her mother's worst enemy, whom she also hated. The girl, sobbing bitterly, begged to be returned to her mother, unable to cope with the horror and betrayal she felt at that moment. Mayfield tried to calm the young lady down by calling her a noisy creature, but Lily hit him furiously and screamed that he was the worst scoundrel of them all. Siegfried sighed heavily, noting that the girl was extremely problematic, and the prince thought with a smile that all little sisters were the same. Siegfried, however, declared that he did not want a younger sister. The prince noted the naivety of his position and noticed that the young lady no longer cried. He promised to take care of her while her mother was away. He asked how she managed to wake up and heard that the girl did not know. Her heart was simply suddenly filled with strength, and this happened to her often. The prince pondered her words for a moment, feeling the strange warmth that emanated from the girl, and marveling at the strength of her heart at the moment of awakening. Lily cried and asked where her mother had gone, desperately wanting to get to her. And the prince was puzzled. He smelled a familiar scent, the same as her mother's. He noted with a smile that his little sister seemed to be doing well. Although he understood that last time her obedience was not enough for him, he wanted to see her beg for help, while at the same time the young princess stared intently after her departing savior. Leanne glanced sideways at the princess, tormented by doubts about why she was in this place and whether she really intended to marry his brother. He saw her unhappy and was tormented, trying to understand the meaning of her words about salvation, knowing that there should be nothing between them except loyalty and gratitude. Leanne's heart began to ache at the thought of marrying another man, bearing him children, and every image of her marriage to her brother caused him unbearable pain. To his regret, the young man could not withstand this emotional tension, and at that very moment collapsed to the ground, overcome with despair. The princess turned around abruptly upon hearing the crash and saw the young man lying on the ground, which made her anxious and wonder what had happened to him. She remembered him once speaking of an illness in his family and wondered if he was having an attack, but she didn't know if it was safe to leave him in this state. Turning to the prince, she stated that it seemed that his guest was not feeling well, to which Noza asked with a grin if she was worried about him. He explained to the princess that the young man was indeed ill. He had inherited from their father the bad blood from which all the rulers of the empire suffered. His mother was an aristocrat from another country who ran away for a man. Although the young man most resembled his father, no one intended to put him on the throne. His attacks looked strange, but the prince found them quite funny to watch. Each time, the young man fell to the ground and looked desperately at everyone, begging for help, but no one came to the rescue. At that very moment, Martina shouted at the prince that he was disgusting, adding that if he wanted her to agree to the marriage, he needed to stop behaving like this. The prince smiled and declared that for her sake he would not let his brother die at the entrance, noting at the same time that her time for reflection was almost running out since the marriage contract was already ready. He declared that if she continued to be stubborn, he would make her his before marriage. He knew that she knew how vile he really was and what he was capable of. That same evening, the princess quietly left her room, looking around to see if anyone was nearby. She was lucky that the prince locked his brother in the basement, because she could get inside through the servants' passage. She wanted to apologize to him, and at the same time, she really hoped that he would become one of the pillars of the nation. Entering the dungeon, she saw a young man lying quietly on the ground. Martina came closer to him and called out, but heard no answer. She noticed that he had a fever and wondered how the prince could leave his brother lying in the basement in such a state. Leanne, delirious, asked for water, and the princess declared that she would return immediately. A moment later, she was already giving him water and was glad that she had brought a blanket with her, because she knew it would make him more comfortable. The young man came to his senses and opened one eye, drinking water. While doing so, he called her. A moment later, he clearly saw the princess in front of him. Closing his eyes, he asked with a gentle smile if he had really seen a dream, since she was next to him. He saw her in a different guise, with short hair and a beautiful smile. At the same time, she said that he was still very strange, but even his strangeness was not disgusting to her. When the bad blood boiled, Leon experienced unbearable pain, lost consciousness, and then saw dreams of events that never happened to him. This time, the dream seemed much more realistic than usual, as if what was happening was not an illusion, but a memory. The young man in this vision approached the general and reported that the same woman was again following their army. The general sighed heavily and decided to approach her himself, not wanting to leave the situation unattended. One of the knights remarked that the general had rather strange preferences, reasoning that if he liked a woman, he could simply take her, and if not, get rid of her. Lian looked at the young man with fury, abruptly cut off his words, and ordered that a soldier's uniform be brought to him. In his dream, he became a general of the army and was on the border, suppressing the duke's rebellion. But all this time, some vagabond followed his army. Upon investigation, it was discovered that she was an exiled princess. He assumed that someone was pursuing her, which is why she decided to stay close to the army. No one dared to approach the military, so she felt safe around them, and her courage and intelligence attracted his attention. To avoid frightening her, he always changed into the uniform of a common soldier before their meetings. Lian slowly approached the princess, who was sitting quietly by the tree, trying not to attract unnecessary attention. She didn't move, but held the small box tightly in her hands, as if it were her only treasure. She asked the soldier with a smile if he was being scolded for constantly bringing her food, and he calmly replied that it was all written off, so there was nothing wrong with it. The princess sincerely thanked him, because without his help, she would have died long ago from hunger and cold. A moment later, she noticed with surprise that she used to love donuts, and the cookies he brought were just as round. With a smile, she thanked him for making her happy and jokingly called him the donut god. Leon asked with a slight smile if it was really that easy to become a god. Martina, with a slight smile, remarked that the gods always come to those in need in difficult times and help them, after which she asked what he needed, since perhaps she too could be of help. At that very moment, her stomach began to rumble traitorously, and he apologized with a smile, making it clear that he would pretend that he had not heard anything. Leanne saw that, despite her noble origins, she was able to withstand such difficult conditions, and even a simple piece of bread brought a sincere smile to her. His heart, hardened by the war, began to beat again because of her, filling with forgotten warmth. But a moment later, he felt ill and cried out in sharp pain. The princess immediately rushed to him and asked excitedly if he was in pain. He sighed heavily and replied that everything was fine, explaining that, due to an inheritance, he had an incurable disease. Lian sighed heavily and quietly admitted that his father also suffered from this disease, and only when he was with his mother did the pain recede, giving him rare relief. He told the story of his parents, adding bitterly that people considered his father a madman for love, and himself a cursed child. The princess cried out, unable to contain her feelings, and hotly objected that this was not true, because it was his appearance today that gave her joy and warmth. She said with a warm smile that those who called him damned were just fools who were unable to see his kind and bright soul. The young man was struck by her words, because no one had ever said anything so warm to him before, and for the first time in a long time, a strange, soft feeling spread through his chest. A moment later, he looked at her with a tender smile and quietly promised that he would forever keep her words in his heart as the most precious gift. But the battles with the Duke became increasingly bloody, and he had almost no time to visit her, so he left a guard with her, noticing how carefully she clutched the mysterious box to her chest. This is what fueled his interest even more, because he felt that there was something important hidden behind her calmness, and he wanted to know much more about her. After some time, the princess was informed that the general had fallen ill due to overwork, and since there were no women in the army except her, the knight asked her to take care of him. The princess was surprised to notice that he turned out to be a general, since earlier it seemed that he was a completely ordinary soldier, without a hint of power or greatness. The young man was taken aback and asked with slight embarrassment how she had managed to enter his room, as if her appearance had disrupted the usual order. Martina gently asked him not to speak, because his throat was sore from illness, and each word was difficult for him to speak, barely audible. She carefully gave him some warm water to drink, and asked him why he pretended to be a soldier in order to secretly get closer to her and watch her. The princess wanted to know why he had secretly placed a guard after she had recently found herself in trouble. Leanne sheepishly admitted that he simply didn't want to scare her. Martina could not understand whether he was capable of such a thing, because she saw his kindness when he brought her bread, and noticed the strangeness if he was worried. With a smile, she admitted that his oddity did not bother her at all, and even seemed sweet, warming her heart. At that very moment, the young man realized that everything they said about feelings was true. He realized that love was a disease that ran in their blood and made everyone vulnerable. Lean stared at the young princess for a moment, bewildered and in awe, trying to read her thoughts. He sighed heavily and quietly asked if she could stay, because wherever she went, he intended to protect her. Martina looked at him in surprise, not expecting to hear such caring words. At that very moment, she reminded him that the civil war was in full swing, and she did not understand where he got the strength to protect her, but he insisted that it was dangerous to remain alone. At that moment, he began to talk about her personality, and the princess said with a grin that it seemed like he had already understood a lot about her. The young man looked away in embarrassment, unable to find the words to answer. Martina sighed and quietly admitted that her plan would seem like the ravings of a madwoman to him. At that very moment, she shared the secret with a smile, showing him 2 stars, saying that they could just be themselves and shine brightly. Martina added that even in the darkest night they would see each other's radiance and remember their meeting, and then continue on their way. She called one star a poor princess, and the other a fierce warrior with a smile. And it became their secret. Even he smiled back. After some time, the young man went to the battlefield, but every night he gazed intently at the stars, barely holding back his strength, but still letting it go. The princess became a star in his heart, and just thinking about her gave him the strength to overcome any obstacle. The thought of her was enough for the pain during the attacks to disappear, and he was ready to enter even the most terrible battle. Lean quickly won the civil war, but he did not appear at the awards ceremony. He was indifferent to rumors about a new imperial crown. All this time he thought about meeting the princess. His people looked after her, but she went into the forest in search of a mysterious magical creature. Leanne sincerely wanted to see her and tell her a lot. He wanted to give her his favorite donuts, but when he saw what happened to her, he was simply stunned. Leanne stood there for a moment, stunned, looking at the lifeless body of his beloved star, unable to believe what had happened. He was confused because he wanted to tell her so many words, to find out what she liked most, and to hear her beautiful voice again. He dreamed of showing her winter landscapes because he knew how her red hair would shine against the backdrop of a snowy empire. Leanne was lost, not understanding what he had sinned in, as if all fate had turned away from him at that moment. In this life, only one star shone for him, which he lost, and he desperately begged the gods to return its radiance to him. The prophet looked closely at the young man and took pity on him, seeing that he was cursed with bad blood and fate. He asked if the young man was ready to go after her, and Leanne immediately realized that she had been looking for him all this time. The prophet said that he could send him after the princess, but then his bad blood would boil even more strongly, and his memory would dissipate. He asked if Leanne was ready to endure all this for the sake of meeting his beloved, testing his determination and fortitude. The young man looked intently at his star, and with a gentle smile declared that he was ready to do anything for her. Leanne, holding her close, said that no matter how many times he had to start all over again, he would give everything just to be next to her. In his past life, he thought he would definitely cry when he could see her again, and now his heart was filled with this feeling. The princess looked at the young man with a tender smile, glad that he had woken up and was next to her again. His heart was filled with happiness from meeting her, and the smile never left his face. Martina noticed his strange behavior. While sick, he was beaming with joy, and immediately said that the situation was difficult and his help was needed. Leanne hastily asked if he should really help her, and the princess confirmed that only he could handle it. The young man understood that she did not yet know about his feelings, but he knew that they had a lot of time ahead to change everything. Martina said that the father threatened the child if she did not agree to the marriage, and she only pretended that she was ready for it. Liane looked at the young princess and wondered if he would have to kill her father. The princess was taken aback, not expecting such a bold question, and froze in tension. She reminded him with a smile that the last time she asked him to kill a member of the imperial family, he refused. But now everything had changed. Martina sighed and admitted that she hated her father, but if he died, a storm would rise in the country, and Liane sadly agreed with her. She didn't look away for a while, seeing that something in him had changed and was worrying her at the same time. The princess asked if anything had really changed since her question about his illness. Liane replied with a joyful smile that he now saw the whole picture. Martina didn't understand all of Liane's words, but she was determined to tell him her plan, as the time in the house allowed her to study the security schedule. The princess began to express her thoughts, but at that very moment she was taken aback when she heard the door creak. Nosa entered the dungeon and said that he wanted to chat with his fiancée, but she was not there. And he noticed her concern for her brother. He looked at the princess with anger and asked why she was next to a young man at such a late hour of the night. At that moment, a dead silence reigned. Lian told his brother that he had no right to forcibly keep the princess in this place. Lianon stated that the princess did not agree to this marriage. Nosa looked at his brother in surprise and indignantly declared that it seemed his fiancée had already told him everything. The princess understood that the prince did not realize how strong his brother was, and that she needed to buy time until he fully recovered, because he would become her main weapon. At that very moment, she approached the young prince and declared that she was ready to consider the marriage proposal. Martina said she was tired of living in fear and wanted to discuss her rights now before signing anything. Nosa looked at the princess with a fierce grin and at the same moment grabbed her by the face. He asked with a fierce grin if she still believed she could bargain. Taking pleasure in her fear, he declared that she was just a bargaining chip since her father had sold her, and she herself seemed unaware of her situation. Nosa, mockingly, noted that her father had calculated everything perfectly to increase his power through the union of empires. At that very moment, with a fierce grin, he said that with the help of her father, he would easily become an emperor, and the father himself would become the secret ruler of several empires. He added that the plan was perfect. All that remained was to take care of the little pawn. The princess was furious when she realized that they wanted to use her as a puppet, sacrificing her future for the sake of marriage. At that very moment, the prince pushed the princess away and declared that marriage to him was the best thing that could have happened to her. After all, this was the only way that the princess, rejected by everyone, could somehow be of some use. Martina knew that such words did not frighten her, because she heard similar things all the time. She remembered how her brother looked at her with fury, believing that she would die due to poor health. But, seeing her alive, he went a different way. Martina always heard that she had a terrible character and was a disgrace to the family. She remembered her brother mocking her, asking how she was finding prison life, and saying that looking miserable suited her much better. The princess couldn't count how many times she had heard something like this in her past life, because she was considered an unworthy princess, and her parents and brother did not recognize her as a member of the family. Although life began anew, there was no significant change, but the princess was not going to bow her head and wanted to determine her own future. The lady understood that she now had a new family. At that very moment, she remembered her dearly beloved daughter. Martina was ready to fight for her daughter, who always remained by her side, supporting her in all troubles. She remembered how the girl, with a tender smile, joyfully called her mother, and her heart filled with warmth. She knew that she was ready to give her life for the sake of her dearly beloved daughter. Now the princess understood that there were people nearby who followed her and supported her. Linny, a faithful knight, admired the princess's courage and was ready to protect her. Louise looked at the princess with admiration because her brilliant plan saved the lives of both mother and daughter. Phoenix praised the princess's insight, although he himself was no less a genius. Miel, with a gentle smile, told the princess that he would not be the only one who would follow her, ready to support her in any trouble. Liane looked at her with warmth and said that it was she who allowed him to become her faithful, sharp sword. Martina realized that she was no longer the worthless villain who had nothing. At that very moment, She gave Lian her order. He embraced her tenderly, but glared menacingly at all opponents, ready to protect the princess at any cost. Lian, without hesitation, declared that he was ready to give even his life for her, subjugating her to power, glory, and the crown. The young prince was taken aback, because for some reason his brother's eyes turned bright red, exuding extraordinary determination. At that very moment, in a trembling voice, he called for the guards to immediately remove the threatening monster. The princess sighed heavily and asked the faithful knight to take her out of the dungeon, noting that he spared no one. Lian pulled the princess towards him and hugged her tightly, asking her to tenderly close her eyes, protecting her from fear. He clutched the sword in his hand, pointing it at her, noting that the sight of blood could harm her. The princess was frightened, but remained silent. At that very moment, the knight screamed in fear that before them was a monster, a real monster, inspiring terror. Lian did not answer them, but only looked menacingly and furiously at everyone present, hugging the princess and protecting her. The sounds of the carnage did not frighten Martin at all. She felt calm and warm in her soul, as if she had been hugged tightly in a past life. After the bloody massacre, the young prince was taken aback by his brother's eyes. He declared that in the history of the empire, several emperors had died of madness, all with blood-red eyes. The princess looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he was still talking such nonsense. She knew she had never expected to find herself in such a situation. Martina noted with a sneer that he had wanted to use the woman as a bargaining chip in a power struggle, but had lost everything, and she was burning with anticipation as she awaited the court's verdict. Nosa declared that he sincerely wanted to become her husband, because the impudent villain and the last scoundrel are the perfect couple. She retorted that he only wanted to be her father's puppet, and she didn't like being bossed around. He laughed, admitting that she was indeed difficult. The prince added that if her brother were to cling to her, she would be unhappy. Martina replied that her happiness depended only on herself. At that very moment, he said with a grin that things couldn't get any worse, so he wanted to give his younger brother a gift. Nosa loudly declared that the taste of an innocent man's blood would drive his brother completely mad. The prince said that the emperor and the aristocrats would not be able to look at him. He could hardly contain his laughter as he imagined their faces. He added that he would rejoice even in hell because his brother had completely gone mad, while calling on him to take a bold action to cut his neck. At that very moment, the young man came to his senses and declared that he did not want to play by his brother's rules and that he must be punished. Nosa was in shock. He didn't understand how his brother had come to his senses so quickly, since he had suffered for several days after the attack. Lean noted that he knew how to control his attacks and had accumulated enough experience. Nosa realized that exposure would be his undoing and became frightened. Lean hit his brother and knocked him out for talking too much. The princess admitted with a smile that it was the quickest way to shut him up. Lean sighed and noted that her brother had exhausted her. The princess smiled, thanked him for saving her, and asked if he was okay. Lian replied with a smile that he only had a few scratches, a mere trifle. The princess asked what he was going to do after returning to the empire, but then her head began to spin from a strong smell. Lian managed to catch the princess and noticed that she was not used to the sight of blood, so he asked her to lean against the table and rest. He looked closely at the young princess and regretted showing her such a dirty picture. He also stated that next time he would try to eliminate someone without leaving a trace, which left Martina puzzled. The princess's heart began to beat even faster because he was too close, and this made her feel uneasy. She immediately remembered how recently he had fought and hugged her, causing a familiar and pleasant sensation. Lian looked closely at the princess and asked if he could ask a question. She sighed and declared that she was listening to him. Plucking up his courage, the young man asked if her child had a father. Martina froze in shock, not expecting such a question at all. She laughed and asked if he thought her child was her lover's. She explained that she had to raise the sacred beast herself. With a smile, she declared that the sacred beast was her daughter. She had never had a father, and at that moment, Lian understood everything and blushed. Martina asked him with a smile if he had been thinking about something like that all this time. He sheepishly asked her not to laugh. At that moment, Lian looked at the princess with a gentle smile and declared that if she did not stop laughing, he would not be able to restrain himself. Lian looked closely at the princess and pulled her closer, wanting to kiss her. But at that very moment, the princess stopped him. She looked away sadly and stated that the most important thing now was her daughter's safety and her right to inherit the throne. Martina thanked him for everything he had done, but admitted that now was not the time to talk about feelings. He smiled and declared that he would wait for her because no one knew how to wait better than him, and the oath of fidelity given to her would be eternal. At that very moment, Phoenix appeared in the room and angrily asked the young man if the princess hadn't said she wasn't interested. The phoenix shouted that he was just a wild beast and should move away from the princess, and threatened him with magical power. Lian looked at the wizard with fury, noticing that he had become stronger, and decided to test his power. Then the princess shouted for Phoenix to lower his weapon, since Lian had saved her, but they did not listen and started fighting. Lian, looking at the princess, declared that he would return his brother to his homeland, because the civil war was not over yet, and he must return. He looked at the princess with a gentle smile and warmth and said that they would meet soon, and that his queen would find peace in the empire, inviting her to visit. He wanted to show her the landscapes of the beautiful empire. The princess agreed with a smile and hoped that by that time he would already have become a hero. Phoenix intervened in their sweet dialogue and stated that the young man might not have become a hero. The princess looked at them with a smile and reassured them. Phoenix told the princess what kind of arsenal he had prepared for her salvation. Martina noted with a smile that he was clearly preparing for a siege, deciding to use all the stones, despite all the research and calculations. Phoenix asked with a smile if she remembered the owner of that underground auction, because he wanted to knock all the magic stones out of him at her request. The young wizard declared that the rest would be discussed on the way to the palace, noting that the princess needed rest after what she had been through. As soon as she entered the carriage, she immediately noticed her secretary, who looked worried and sad. A moment later, the princess asked what was happening to her daughter. Miel, without looking at the princess, stated that the prince himself had ordered her to be taken away, and the girl was now safe, eagerly awaiting her mother's return. Martina was happy to hear this, but she couldn't understand why her brother suddenly showed such concern. As soon as she knew that her daughter was safe, fatigue overcame her. She had hardly slept in the last few days. Miel continued to tell the princess in detail about all the events of the last few days. But a moment later, he was taken aback and looked up, noticing something unusual. Phoenix gestured for the young man to be quiet, as the princess was already fast asleep. At that very moment, Phoenix pulled her towards him, making sure that the princess was more comfortable. A moment later, Phoenix looked at his companion with a satisfied smile and silently whispered that he was a coward. Miel was furious, but he understood that the wizard was right about something, and this calmed him down a little. Some time later, the young lady returned to the palace, holding back her emotions. She understood that for some people, home is a place where they can take off their armor, but for her, it is a place where you cannot survive without a weapon, and this always excited her. Phoenix looked at the princess with concern and asked her not to leave, his voice full of anxiety. She asked in surprise if he really wanted to tell her something, and he stated that during those days he and the secretary had been planning her escape. But he was still upset because the secretary hated him, and the princess noted that he deserved it. A moment later, the young man showed the princess the medal of the supreme magician. Phoenix stated that when the princess was kidnapped, he tried his best to increase his level. During the day, he took exams, and at night he and his secretary gathered people, and now he was the youngest supreme mage in the magic tower. She knew that something like this would be very expensive, but he assured her that one high mage could replace an army, so it was worth it. Then he gave his medal to the princess and said that it was his gift. She was surprised that he was ready to give her such a valuable thing. The princess asked with a smile whether the fact that she had been kidnapped had made him afraid that he would not have a sponsor and would have to work alone. Phoenix stated that she had always been suspicious of him, as it was quite dangerous to have a genius wizard around, and she noted with a smile that his self-esteem was on the same level as his talent. At that very moment, the young man declared that now she could trust him a little more. The princess looked at him with a smile, because before he looked like a homeless cat, ready to pretend to be friendly for the sake of a treat. But now, although he didn't say it openly, his tail was already wagging every time he saw her. The princess looked at the young man with a satisfied smile, as she realized that the state had a new support. At that very moment, she extended her hand to him and declared that she very much wanted him to swear allegiance to her. Phoenix, with a satisfied smile, declared that he vowed to stand by her side as the most powerful wizard in the empire. At that very moment, he took her hand and, pulling her towards him, kissed her on the forehead. The princess was taken aback, as she did not expect such a thing. Phoenix stated that she should not treat him like a child from now on, while calling her sister. Then she saw a notification that with the help of a kiss, she had replenished the energy of the sacred beast, and also unlocked a skill that brings good luck to the country. Martina realized that her daughter would become a legend who would protect the fate of the country. Meanwhile, the young lady, sitting in the room, clearly felt that her mother had returned. Lily knew that when her mother returned, she had to do everything to keep her safe. Lily knew she had to greet her mother with a joyful smile. As soon as Martina crossed the threshold of her room, her daughter greeted her with a joyful smile. Martina noticed with a soft smile how her daughter had grown up, and her heart sank with tender anxiety. Lily showed courage, as if she was ready to challenge the wind and darkness itself. But suddenly tears glistened in her eyes, longing for her mother filled her little heart. The girl, barely holding back her sobs, admitted her weakness and asked forgiveness for the lie. She recalled nightmares, and her mother tried to calm her with soft words and hugs. Lily reached out to her mother, and the warmth of her mother's touch melted away her fears. Martina noticed a mischievous sparkle in her daughter's eyes and called her smart and brave. Lily mentioned with a smile that Miel had seen some of his mother's traits in her as a child, causing slight surprise. Martina was shocked because they had not communicated for a long time since the quarrel and the kidnapping. Miel looked at the princess with sadness, as if deciding not to interfere in their fate anymore. Lily was confused by the young man's strange behavior. He had been concerned about salvation all the time, but now he was silent. The girl proudly declared her love for her mother and threatened anyone who dared to offend her. Martina noticed that her friend was clearly out of sorts and suggested celebrating the reunion with a picnic. With tenderness, she wished her daughter peaceful dreams and easy rest after her worries. Lily was delighted at her mother's return and tried to please her in every possible way, despite the princess's fatigue. The next day, the maid announced that everything was ready for the picnic, and the smile never left her face. The princess and her daughter looked at the people around them with excitement, anticipating the long-awaited journey. Madame mentioned summoning the parents to an audience, but Martina sternly rejected the conversation. She decided to postpone the meeting so as not to get into new quarrels until she found peace of mind. His rage was terrible. His son's attempt to seize the sacred beast ended in failure. Mayfield explained that information was merely a tool, and the prince had failed to win Martina over. He wondered why his father relied on other people's methods and proposed his own path to power. The emperor proclaimed his desire to unite the continent and suddenly felt weak, asking his son for a potion. Mayfield, with a sly smile, understood that he could achieve his goal himself, despite his father. The young people arrived at the picnic spot, and the young lady enthusiastically absorbed the beauty of nature. She screamed joyfully, feeling for the first time that the world was so alive and bright, as if magical. Martina warned her daughter to beware of the tall grass where insects were hiding. The daughter, who had never walked outside the palace, explored the new spaces with delight. At that very moment, Lily grabbed a large worm and turned to her mother with curiosity, confirming her words. The young ladies laughed at Lily's discovery, but the maid, on the contrary, screamed, stepping aside in surprise. The young princess watched her daughter intently, who was seizing every moment as if the world were new and wonderful. Martina sighed heavily, noticing in Lily the same irrepressible energy and passion that she had once seen in herself. The princess's gaze slid towards her old friend, as if seeking confirmation of her observations and thoughts. Miel smiled softly, his eyes shining with quiet determination, and he asked for a small but important favor. Plucking up his courage, he asked that there be no titles between them on this day, only friendship, light and sincere. On this day, he wanted to be just friends with her, without titles, duties, and rules, just close and free. The princess looked at him in surprise, not believing that this was all. But Miel's soft smile dispelled her doubts. Martina watched carefully, trying to understand his behavior, and he only smiled quietly, jokingly commenting on her rich imagination. She agreed with him, but asked with interest how ordinary friends behave when trying to grasp the boundaries of new communication. He timidly asked if he could call her by her first name, and she nodded, feeling the lightness of the moment. Martina remembered with a slight sadness that the last time they held hands was in childhood, when the world seemed simple and carefree. After he became her servant, the Empress often allowed them to walk freely along the palace alleys, enjoying quiet strolls. Quarrels with my brother, my mother's strict instructions, and my father's indifference came alive in my memory, but my loyal friend was always there, ready to support me. He became the only one with whom she could walk and talk without rules and conventions, giving the princess a feeling of true freedom. From time to time, the young man would tease the princess, causing her to laugh and feel a little angry at the same time. The princess had mixed feelings, not understanding how he dared to deceive her and at the same time win her attention so easily. She couldn't help but burst out laughing, seeing such a carefree, lively, and mischievous creature next to her for the first time. Childhood memories, though simple, warmed the princess's soul, filling her heart with rare lightness and bright joy. She enjoyed the casual conversation, when words and laughter flowed freely, but now his silence brought a strange tension. Miel watched her with slight surprise, as if he doubted whether the princess would be uncomfortable holding her hand, and waited for her reaction. The princess was surprised to notice that holding hands was not at all unpleasant, since in childhood it had been natural and calm. The young man sighed heavily, as if realizing that they were now adults and much had changed, and the world had become more complex. Martina felt that nothing had changed inside. Their friendship and trust remained the same as in childhood. His palms now completely covered her arms, causing a strange warmth and a feeling of closeness that was new and strong. The princess looked at his hands with bewilderment, feeling their heat, and realized that her embarrassment was growing with every moment. A moment later, the young lady looked in surprise at her mother, noticing how the adults left together, quietly and harmoniously. She watched them with a smile, feeling that the adults were behaving like happy lambs, carefree and cheerful. Louise and Linny were delighted to see this picture, because for a long time, they had been worried that the young people had stopped communicating. The girls noticed that the young man could see the wizard as a rival, and the mercenary was too close to the princess. The young lady looked at her companions in bewilderment, trying to understand what they were talking about, and felt a slight excitement from other people's conversations. The ladies asked the girl with interest which of the three she considered to be the father, observing her attentive face and slight confusion. Lily made it clear that she played with Miel most often, recalling their funny and vibrant childhood games together. The girl understood how difficult this choice was, but her retinue supported her, realizing that the princess deserved the best. A moment later, the princess approached them with a slight smile, carefully watching their conversation and trying to understand the meaning. The young ladies were slightly taken aback, embarrassedly claiming that they had only discussed trifles, but Martina guessed that they had their own secrets. The young ladies greeted the princess with joyful smiles, beaming with anticipation of a happy moment and a little secret. Lily beamed with joy as she congratulated her mother on her return and presented her with a beautiful cake, like a small miracle filled with light and warmth. For a moment, the princess stood in a daze, not expecting such a surprise, but soon realized that the preparations had taken all morning. Martina thanked her comrades for the gift with a joyful smile, wanting to keep this day in her memory as a rare and bright moment. Miel looked closely at the princess, feeling a quiet hope that her radiance would remain bright and endless. Inwardly, he wondered if he would be able to stay close when that special moment came, when he would need to be strong. They sat together for a while, chatting and laughing, filling the evening with easy joy and relaxed harmony. The princess understood that rest was important, but the evenings should be used to develop the skills that her daughter had carefully instilled in her. They were congratulated on their first successful use of luck for the state, opening the opportunity to choose one of three types of power. She chose a powerful force and set out for the valley, determined to claim the reward and begin a determined quest. A moment later, the young lady was taken aback when a sudden rain began to fall, the drops of cold water changing her plans and mood. Martina warned that it was dangerous to stay in the rain for a long time and asked the secretary to carry her daughter to the carriage, taking care of her health. However, turning around, she was taken aback. Her friend was no longer there. His traces seemed to have dissolved into the air and rainy dust. Linny explained that the young man had never returned, suggesting that the princess go to the carriage while she hurried to look for him. The princess was puzzled, wondering why she had not noticed his departure, and decided that she would find him herself without delay. At this time, the young man sat quietly near the pond in the rain, thinking about the situation and trying not to get too wet. Hearing the princess's voice, he was taken aback, not understanding why she had come to him alone and risked herself in the rain. He sighed quietly, realizing that her high status prevented her from getting sick, and began to take off his outerwear to cover her. Martina watched him closely, realizing that his request to spend the day as friends was preparation for an important conversation. She understood that now they were alone, and he might not have another chance, so everything that was happening became especially significant. Miel cried out, warning that first they had to hide so that the princess wouldn't get wet, and then he would tell everything he had been hiding. The princess did not want to leave, realizing that as soon as they returned to the carriage, the opportunity for conversation would disappear, and the truth would remain hidden. At that very moment, she abruptly declared that he was obliged to give an answer here and now, and the young man was taken aback, not expecting such decisiveness. He looked at the princess intently, a feeling of tension filling the air, and his old agreements lost all force. Martina was determined to understand his concerns, not caring about the rules, wanting clarity and honesty between them. The young man scooped the princess up into his arms, and her words died in her throat as her body found itself in his confident embrace. She came to her senses and sharply demanded to be released, not wanting to return to the carriage in the rain and cold wind. Martina watched in bewilderment as he remained silent and gripped her shoulder tightly, as if protecting and holding her at the same time. A moment later, they found themselves in a small gazebo, where the tense atmosphere made every moment palpable and tense. Miel took off his glasses and became embarrassed as he tried to explain that the princess's rescue had been delayed by difficulties and dangers, which had filled the days with nightmare. The princess realized that it was not his fault, because her role as a princess meant being prepared for danger, and there was no point in being angry with him. She remembered his care and maintenance of dignity, and he, in turn, suffered every time he heard her words about being ready for trials. He felt honored to be her subject, but he recognized the limitations of his role and the uncertainty of how to ensure the princess's full protection. Martina was puzzled by his words about the limits of his duties, not fully understanding the depth of his feelings and inner struggle. She knew that he was the closest person and had access to everything that concerned her safety and life. The young man admitted to tormenting self-criticism after her abduction, blaming himself for the helplessness and wrong thoughts that tormented him. The princess knew that no one could do more, and without him she would not be standing here now next to him, safe and alive. She wanted him to realize that he was the only one for her, and that his efforts had not gone unnoticed. Miel, with tears in his eyes, admitted that his sins seemed more terrible to him than anything else, that he was worried about her, and this pain weighed on his heart. Martina was puzzled by everything that was happening. The young man could not resist and kissed the princess with such passion that Martina was confused, not understanding the true strength of his feelings. She felt the strength of his embrace and the pain in her cheekbones, while simultaneously being surprised by his determination and the depth of his emotions. He looked away, asking her to remain still, and afraid to hurt her and showing concern even in the passionate moment. The princess was confused as she watched him, realizing that he had become a pillar of nations, but was still a man with doubts. She pulled back and tried to understand what had happened, longing to hear an explanation of his feelings and actions. Martina wanted to understand whether he was leaving her in her secretarial role, trying to find out the young man's true intentions. Miel looked at her intently, confirming her importance and membership in the imperial family, assessing her determination. The princess was at a loss, trying to comprehend the meaning of the kiss and the meaning of the words he was barely speaking. She wanted to know if it was a confession or a mistake, but he coldly stated that it was just a mistake and should be forgotten. His attempt to break up with her easily clashed with the strength of her feelings, because years of living together had made the connection deep and meaningful. The princess struggled to hold back her tears, asking if he would leave, and he admitted that seeing her cry for the first time was enough for his own sake. She was furious and confused at the same time, because her tears had previously accompanied his falls, and now he himself had decided to leave. Martina didn't know how to cope with her emotions. Meanwhile, the emperor was informed of the duke's and countess's request for an audience, creating tension in the palace in anticipation of a response. The duke furiously reported on the borders of the lands and the plundered warehouses of magic crystals, blaming the princess for their loss. He claimed that only the emperor and his family knew about the crystal reserves, and rumors of the princess's marriage negotiations spread throughout the empire. The duke insisted on limiting the princess's freedom for the sake of state security. The emperor thought with a grin about his son and the possible war. The countess warned that the leakage of crystals to the enemy would lead to irreparable consequences, threatening the entire stability of the empire. They claimed that the prince had a bad character, and that the princess had committed a crime that, in the opinion of the nobility, required punishment. After some time, the prince slept quietly in his office, leaving the palace in an anxious silence and tension after all the events. A moment later, he opened his eyes to hear his sister scream, full of rage and despair, demanding an answer for his actions. He didn't immediately realize that his sister had become a child again, and then he realized that he had fallen asleep by the window, and everything that had happened was just a dream. Mayfield sighed heavily, not understanding where she was leading, and the princess shouted that it was she who had obtained the information while in captivity. She recalled their agreement, where the information was supposed to destroy all the aristocrats, and accused him of treason. Mayfield played with her words with a smirk, calling her a useless girl in an attempt to diffuse the tension, but this only fueled the conflict. He remembered how she had once curled up in his arms like a cute little bunny, evoking warmth and a gentle tenderness in him. But with the advent of power, she turned into a disobedient devil, defying his every command and desire to control. Martina couldn't resist and splashed out her glass of wine, showing that she was smarter, stronger, and not at all useless, ready to fight back. Mayfield became enraged, realizing that the evil rabbit was capable of delivering a painful bite and resisting his power. She screamed that she no longer wanted to be his sister, and the prince insisted that the decision was not in her hands, emphasizing control. He grabbed her, demanding the behavior that had once been habitual, but the princess fiercely resisted and did not listen. At that very moment, he hugged her tightly, trying to return her to her former submissiveness, feeling a mixture of anxiety and a desire for control. He wanted to see her weak, like a baby rabbit in his arms, knowing that disagreement would cause pain and withdrawal, a willingness to submit. Siegfried approached and calmed the prince, reminding him that the reception would soon begin and that decorum was necessary, creating a break in the tension. The prince, with a grin, assured that everything was fine and it was just a nightmare, but demanded that the boy watch his behavior at the reception. He understood that events were going according to plan, because his father would soon introduce his heir, and the strategy was beginning to bear fruit. At the same time, he wondered if his sister understood what would happen next, intending to break her resistance and subjugate her again. Thoughts of her future and her weakness excited him, because he was waiting for the moment when he would see her submissive and pitiful state. At the same time, the young princess, with a gentle smile, helped her daughter put on her outfit, feeling the warmth and joy of the moment. After all the preparations, she admired Lily with pride and delight, who shone in her new dress like a little star. Lily was excited and amazed, finding herself for the first time in such a luxurious outfit that emphasized her childish grace. Martina looked at her daughter with pride, feeling that there was no sweeter and more beautiful child in the world, and her heart filled with warmth. At that very moment, the young lady declared with joyful sincerity that her mother was the most beautiful woman in the world, and a radiance of happiness flashed in her eyes. Martina was surprised to notice how her words comforted her daughter, making her heart beat with slight anxiety and pride at the same time. She wondered how much her condition affected Lily, feeling a mixture of concern and doubt inside herself. Lily was taken aback, thinking that the compliment would please her mother, but she saw that the reaction was different, slightly offended her, and caused internal unrest. She understood that her mother was depressed by her friend's departure, and her own feelings were intertwined with anxiety for her parent. At that very moment, the princess jumped up, full of determination and courage, preparing for the upcoming reception, despite her inner excitement. Martina watched her daughter with a satisfied smile, deciding to teach her a game that would ease the tension and bring lightness. She suggested that her daughter imagine everyone she met as carrots to turn the formal event into a game and relieve tension. Lily considered her mother's words, her imagination bringing the room to life, adding a lightness and childish magic to the moment. A moment later, they both laughed, and the atmosphere between them was filled with soft warmth and understanding. Martina rejoiced at her daughter's smile, feeling how it brought confidence and peace back into the princess's heart. Meanwhile, there was a bustle in the banquet hall, and the nobles discussed the princess and her unpredictable behavior with curiosity and fear. The princess, having regained her pride and grace, confidently entered the hall with her daughter, like a ray of light, attracting all eyes. She looked coldly at the aristocrats, and they were taken aback, feeling the power of her presence and the inflexibility of her demeanor. The young men quickly looked away, knowing who had accepted the invitation after the bribe, and they understood that they would not be able to hide from her attention. Martina was aware of the fear and respect that reigned among the nobles, seeing how even courage was lost before her greatness. Before leaving, the secretary reported in detail about the nobles, and the princess felt an emptiness inside, as if the weight of responsibility was a heavy burden on her heart. A moment later, she froze, numb from the unexpected sight. Her faithful friend stood next to her brother, causing a mixture of relief and surprise. Martina was shocked. Her heart sank from the incredible betrayal. Her loyal friend left for her older brother, leaving a void. A piercing cold gripped her soul. The hall seemed icy, and the princess's body was motionless, as if time had stood still. The friend's room was empty. The emptiness had swallowed up all memories. All signs of his presence had disappeared, leaving only darkness. Lily looked away, her little heart feeling her mother's anxiety and a faint whisper of fear for her peace of mind. In her fury, Martina could not understand how a loyal comrade could turn into an enemy, choosing the side of a man she despised. Mayfield approached his sister with a cold smile, formally introducing her to the new council's tenure, leaving the space between them tense. Miel looked at the princess carefully, assessing her beauty and strength, as if weighing her significance and his own capabilities. Martina looked at him menacingly, doubting his true intentions, her heart pounding with pain and betrayal at the same time. Miel's smile was cold, a reminder that he never planned to stay around forever. He acted as an advisor to the crown prince, extending his hand to the princess, a symbol of new acquaintance and formal distance. Martina just looked at him with fury. The silence and stillness caused a storm of emotions. She decided to walk away, leaving behind emptiness. Lily watched carefully, realizing that her mother's anxiety could be reflected on her, and her heart filled with worry. She was confused and didn't know what to do. The girl loudly expressed her hatred for her mother's friend, her small protest sounding like a challenge, increasing the tension in the room. The young man stood there, frozen, his words stuck in his throat. The look was empty. Only a quiet, silent smile spoke of a restrained feeling. The emperor broke the pause by announcing the start of the banquet, his voice echoing throughout the hall, drawing the attention of the aristocrats and causing slight alarm. The aristocrats whispered among themselves, discussing the latest events and magic crystals, each trying to predict the consequences for themselves. The emperor apologized and told of the attack of a neighboring empire. Overcome by greed and avarice, the crystal reserves were seized. He sighed heavily, realizing that his daughter had been drawn into the chaos. He stated that he did not link his personal fate with the fate of the state. The look on his wife's face was a reminder of betrayal. The transfer of confidential information during marriage negotiations had left her stigmatized. An investigation was launched, temporarily disqualifying Martina from inheritance rights, which caused protest and an internal storm in the princess. She claimed that she had never collaborated with enemies and did not understand why she would reveal secrets to an unworthy person. The emperor insisted that stubbornness was unacceptable. The decision would be made by all the nobles, and Martina tried to maintain her composure. The princess realized that the magic crystals were more important than her independence. In front of her stood a cold and indifferent father, just like in a past life. A weak mother appeared before my eyes, and greedy aristocrats ready to crush her, and the depth of the threat was intensified by the prince's evil gaze. She understood that everyone wanted to destroy her. The empress reminded him of the need to respect his father. The imperial cry increased the tension, emphasizing the importance of the crystals to the state. Whispers from the aristocrats spread throughout the hall, seeing the princess's inflexibility, knowing that they were predictably acting against her. Martina questioned who really held power, holding the magical stones found in the cave in her hands. She declared herself the heir, stating that the crystals would remain in the empire, and if she were stripped of her title, she would give them to other states. The aristocrats were discouraged. At the picnic, Martina received her long-awaited reward in the form of crystals, and now the power was entirely in her hands. The emperor was furious, unable to accept his daughter's courage, and Martina offered him a choice: execution or rehabilitation for the sake of prosperity. She kept her eyes on her father, leaving the decision in his hands. Demonstrating strength and independence in the midst of threats and intrigue, she watched their actions in silence for a while. Miel watched with a smile, seeing her radiance, like a flower that could only bloom in the midst of war and bloodshed, amazed at her resilience. The prince could not resist and burst into wild laughter. The prince looked at his sister with a grin, realizing that refusing to submit left her with only the opportunity to die with dignity. Martina stood calmly and awaited the verdict. The princess understood that whoever she led, everyone would follow her. The one to whom she restored faith would fight for it. Shedding blood, she knew that the true support of the state was in her hands. Martina knew that only by having more cards in her hand could she avoid being devoured by the evil royal family. The princess clearly understood that only then would she be able to firmly grasp her destiny in her own hands. Did you like the recap? Want a continuation? Write Part 2 in the comments.